Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the George W. Norris Legislative Chamber. The afternoon session is about to reconvene. Senators, please record your presence. Roll call. Mr. Clerk, please record.
There is a quorum present, Mr. President.
Thank you. Do you have any items for the record?
I have no items at this time, Mr. President.
Senator Lippincott would like to announce a guest under the north balcony. Cindy Johnson from Grand Island, please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. Mr. Clerk, first item on the afternoon agenda, please.
Mr. President, returning to debate on the amendments to the permanent rules on proposed rule change 3 from Senator Erdman, amending Rule 1, Section 1 and Rule 3, Section 8. When the legislature left this morning upon recess, pending was the amendment to the permanent rules as well as a motion to recommit from committee from Senator Conrad.
Senator Raybould, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon, colleagues. I stand in support of Senator Conrad's motion to recommit to committee. And, before we all jump back into debate, I just want to do a recap of what some of the senators have said about this entire rules debate. And I tried to take the highlights. And so I wanted to quote Senator Wishart, and she said, when we view the lenses on all the rule changes, what is the problem we are trying to solve? Senator McKinney said it very clearly. Why are we even debating the rules? We established the rules last session, and then we changed them mid-session, so why are we doing it again? Senator Conrad, in her opening remarks, really said everything so well, and there's no way I could ever recap it, but basically her thoughts are, does this make us better as a legislative body? Does this fortify the amazing unicameral that we have? Are we going down a pathway that is more divisive, or are we actually building relationships with our colleagues that make us better legislatures, which makes us better policymakers? So those are the real great questions that my colleagues have asked. But, I don't expect you to listen to me, and I'm okay with that. But I do want to read some words of some former state senators. Many of you have worked with them already. Many of you know them. This is something that they presented last year to us, and it was a local view from Senator Galen Hadley and Senator Greg Adams, and I'd like to point out that both of those served as a speaker. And then it was signed on by 11 other former state senators. It was from Matt Williams, Mark Coulterman, John Stinner, Robert Hilkeman, Annette Dubas, Kate Sullivan, Kathy Campbell, John McAllister, Paul Schumacher, my cousin, and Vicki McDonald. And here's what they wrote, and I think it's worth noting. And if you're not going to listen now, then that's okay. I'm going to have the pages make copies, and we'll put them on your desk for you so you can read at your leisure. But this is what they said. The nonpartisan structure of our legislature has been the pride of Nebraskans since 1937. As former speakers and senators of the legislature, we saw firsthand how the rules and traditions of the legislature preserve this nonpartisanship, which produces more thoughtful policy that serves the state as a whole. Our unique nonpartisan one-house structure improved on several aspects of a partisan bicameral system. Instead of party leaders having the only meaningful voices in the body, all senators here are equal and independent and can contribute their own strengths and experience to policymaking. All senators, regardless of party, can represent their constituents equally. Every bill introduced receives a public hearing, not just those introduced by senators of the same political party as the committee chair. Every senator has a chance to make the case for his or her bills, and more importantly, the public is afforded the opportunity to voice their opinions on every single one. This is how Nebraskans serve as the legislature's second house. Another way this nonpartisanship shines is when senators elect their internal leadership. positions, thank you, for Speaker and committee chairs using a private ballot. This allows senators the autonomy to vote for leaders they believe are the most qualified to serve in those roles rather than who is the most politically powerful. Otherwise, senators might be pressured to vote for a senator simply because they belong to the same political party. With only 49 members in the body, this preserves relationships so senators can work together and have a productive session. Private ballots have long been used for selecting internal leadership positions within school boards, county commissioners, private organizations, etc. Republican majority legislatures have maintained this process for decades because state senators from all political affiliations have recognized its benefits to the legislature and to the state. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Raybold. Senator Conrad, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good afternoon, colleagues. I am really grateful for all of the ideas that have been brought forward in regards to Senator Erdman's proposed rule change to eliminate a longstanding and present tradition to conduct ourselves in a nonpartisan manner, as evidenced through our internal electoral process for leadership positions, which is undeniably distinct from policy matters that come before the legislature and absolutely require transparency and a public vote. So I want to continue the dialogue that we started when I opened on my amendment and provide a few other additional points. So again, the nonpartisan unicameral legislature was gifted to us, even though ideated by then Senator George Norris, by the Nebraska people. Nonpartisan unicameral legislature through a variety of means, including by undermining critical features like nonpartisanship, like secret ballot for leadership positions, which has been utilized in essence since our inception. And the reason that the people gifted us the nonpartisan unicameral legislature, which we have been so proud to steward for almost 100 years in this state as a model of civility and problem solving, perhaps until very recently, is because it helps to guard against, as an institution, some of the most dangerous aspects in democracy that even our founders warned us against. Colleagues, look no further. Go and dust off your Federalist Papers if you need to, or perhaps they're more top of mind for members that have reviewed them recently. But look at the danger that the founders warned us about in regards to faction and how divisive that would be in our democratic process. By removing partisanship from our elections and our service, we were able to strike a blow against faction and to focus on policy and to focus on debate and put aside personalities and partisanship. Any attempt to undermine the nonpartisan unicameral legislature flies in the face of our Constitution and the will of the people, as evidenced by our Constitution and poll after poll after poll that shows that Nebraskans want less partisanship, not more. It is absolutely critical that we guard against factions and we guard against partisanship. If those members who want accountability or publicity for how they organize their individual vote for leadership positions, if they want to transmit that in any manner, they're so afforded the right to do so. They have no need to change our permanent rules, except for they want to, because they want to undermine the nonpartisan unicameral legislature and have been transparent about their intention, to their credit. They have literally sought to abolish our nonpartisan unicameral legislature. When they haven't been able to be effective in that regard, they've taken to our rules to undercut the hallmarks and the unique features of our nonpartisan unicameral legislature that is more transparent and more visible and more engaging, thank you, Mr. President, than any other system of government. in our sister states or on the federal level. It's nonpartisan, it's one house, it's small size by design. It is more transparent than any other aspect of government. Every bill gets a hearing. There is no secret conference committee. Each senator has an equal voice and an equal vote. It is not simply a look at the partisan registration to determine who carries the day, and that is a fundamental misunderstanding of the system that we serve in, that I would contend that I disagree with my friend Senator Erdman in that regard. It can't and it shouldn't be about political parties in Nebraska, and that has nothing to do with figuring out efficient, effective leadership votes and a deliberative process. And nothing in this rule helps to improve the legislative
That's your
system
time,
or put
Senator.
aside partisanship. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Conrad. Senator DeBoer, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I too am against this proposed rule change. That's why I didn't vote for it out of committee. My reasoning is slightly different in that it's not about politics for me, it's about humans for me. There's a difference for me between an election and the kind of votes that we take on bills or resolutions here in this body. A vote for a resolution or against a bill is about an idea. An election is a choice between a number of human beings. And human beings are different than ideas because we have relationships with human beings. If I had to choose between Senator Linehan and Senator Lindstrom to be revenue chair, which by the way I did, both have the same political affiliation, similar political ideologies, and I have relationships with both. So when I have to mark on that ballot after the letter L-I-N, and I have to keep writing, that ballot has the potential to break a relationship. It has nothing to do with politics. It has to do with the fact that if Senator Lindstrom or Senator Linehan know I'm not voting for them, they keep that in the back of their head. Nothing to do with politics. It's about relationships. It's about human beings. That's the reason that we have secret ballots. We also have secret ballots, if you think about it, in how we vote generally in this country. In 1856, Australia developed the first modern secret ballot system. And it didn't take very long for the rest of the world to find that to be the best system. Jean-Jacques Rousseau talks about how one of the problems with the Roman democracy was originally they had voice votes for elections, but they had to go to secret ballots, or they didn't have the ability to go to secret ballots. He says this was a problem because it led to corruption and bribery for votes. One of the reasons that we as a country went to secret ballots is because of corruption and bribery. Secret ballots stave off corruption and bribery. How do they do that? How do you bribe me to vote for you if you don't know if I'm actually going to do it? If I can go in there and I still have autonomy in that moment in the ballot box and you don't know, you're much disincentivized to the corruption and the bribery that comes from those kinds of open votes. Here, we're not only talking about committee chairs, we're also talking about the speaker, the chair of the executive board, and the vice chair of the executive board, which are our legislative officers. Now, Senator Arch, I don't think is this way at all. But there could be a speaker, and likely at some point will be a speaker of this legislature, who would very much like to know all the people who did not vote for him or her, because he or she might be less likely to schedule your bills when you like them. And again, it doesn't have to do
1 minute.
anything with party. It may be that I am ideologically aligned with a senator, let's call them Jones, and not ideologically aligned with a senator, let's call them Smith. But I happen to know that Jones is a liar and a drunk. Now, I'm probably going to vote for Smith in a secret ballot because I know they'll be a better administrator. There is a difference between a vote in an election between humans and a vote on the board for ideas. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator DeBoer. Senator Von Gilleren, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today in support of Rule Change 3. And I thank Senator Erdman for bringing this to the Rules Committee and for his determination to bring this to the floor. When I was running for this office, I was told about this committee election rule and how secret ballots are cast for committees and what a conflict can be created when those running for chairs are counting ballots. Some will say that they're voting for them. Some will say that they aren't. And I was just incredulous. I could not believe that such a strange system took place in this body. You have a room full of people who ran for office based on their claims of integrity, honesty, and their desire to serve the people of Nebraska. And then they lie to each other about how they vote for committee chairs. I've heard stories about past sessions where senators did a vote count, thought they had votes for a chair position, and somehow fell short. And actually that happened this last year. Some spent, and not this last year, not referring to anybody in the room right now, but I know of stories where some spent the rest of the session trying to figure out who lied to them and getting even with them. Now that's a great way to spend our time and energy in this room, isn't it? The system we have today is ripe for conflict. It increases, not decreases, the odds of conflict in this body, and it creates friction amongst colleagues who have to work together to get good work done. I was encouraged when I came here to tell people exactly how I'm going to vote on committee chairs and then to honor it. If you're not going to vote for somebody, don't tell them that you are. Seemed pretty simple to me. Actually, the thought that went through my head was, are we in kindergarten? Do we really need to be told these things? We're supposed to be a room full of people who got here on our reputations for honesty and character, but apparently some want to maintain a system where we can set aside our honesty and our character and lie to the people of Nebraska. It's a system that's set up for dishonesty and completely lacks transparency. I've heard the word transparency 100 times this morning about how somehow this secret ballot increases transparency. That's a complete hypocrisy. We don't have caucuses in this House. We don't have a whip that tells us how to vote. We make up our own minds. Senator Conrad said that part of this rule is to avoid intimidation. Well, folks, if you can be intimidated, you don't belong in this room. I guarantee you Senator Conrad can't be intimidated to vote a certain way. Senator Hunt won't be intimidated. Senator DeBoer and many others won't be bullied into voting in a certain way, and I dare you to try. Senator Conrad and then Senator DeBoer also mentioned the sanctity of the privacy of the vote. I believe in that wholeheartedly for the citizens of Nebraska, but not for those who were sent here to do the work of the state. I'll ask you a simple question. When is a secret action by a politician ever proven to be good for the people that they represent? If you don't have the courage to tell someone how you're going to vote, again, you don't belong here. I was elected to represent my district in an open manner. I consider it a matter of integrity to make my vote known and open. To cast a secret vote as an elected official, in my opinion, is dishonest, it lacks transparency, and lacks integrity. And by the way, here's a little snippet we ought to also consider, violates our Constitution, which says every vote shall be taken by voice. I'll always make my votes known and will bear whatever the cost will be from those who disagree. In my opinion, to do otherwise is to lie to the people who sent me here. Senator Raybould asked several times, will these rules changes make the body better? I say yes. Which is better, to keep secrets from our constituents, from the second house, again, a term I keep hearing over and over again, or to be completely transparent with them? Thank you, Mr. President. Or to be completely transparent with them about our leanings on the most important matters that come before us. Senator Rabel went on to read a quote that said, "This process preserves relationships." I don't ever recall reading anywhere that keeping secrets from your colleagues, from your spouse, from your family members, from your friends makes or builds stronger relationships. Regardless of how this vote comes out, I encourage you all to be honest with the citizens of Nebraska. If we really believe in the second house, be honest with them, make the votes open. Once again, I encourage you to pass this rule change to live up to what you were sent here to do, to increase transparency and to require the body to vote with integrity. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Von Gilleren. Senator Frederickson, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon, colleagues. Good afternoon, Nebraskans. I, too, appreciate Senator Erdman's commitment to and interest in government transparency, and I agree that votes should be made public. I also believe that there's a difference between a vote and a ballot. The votes we take in here are all public. That's available for public record. They're on the board. Our constituents, citizens of Nebraska, can look up on how we vote on any policy we decide. Ballots are not public. Ballots are a private matter. And when we're casting ballots for leadership, we can be susceptible to undue pressure and be unable to vote our conscience. Nothing in our rules prohibits all of us from being transparent for how we vote for leadership. My colleagues in here who want transparency on this should be publicly posting or saying or putting in their newsletter how they are voting. I'm happy to share how I vote. But I will also say, I think it's very important for us all to acknowledge that while some of us in here might not be susceptible to bullying, there can be a culture of bullying in here. I've seen it. I've heard it. I've had colleagues in here say things along the lines of, I don't want to vote for X, but my party would crucify me if I voted otherwise. That's something that was literally said to me last year. So we've seen the coercion that can really happen in here. That's a true thing. That's a real thing that happens. When you can't win on merit, you try to win on bullying. That's not just in here, but that's just how the world works. I'd also like to point out that the loudest voices in support of this rule change happen to be some of the most partisan members of this body. Look at the voting records. They don't lie. There are metrics out there from last session. Which members voted across the aisle the most? The receipts are there. Our most nonpartisan members of this body support thoughtful, merit-based leadership. Our friends in the body who push for this support partisan, national platform, essentially, based leadership. That's not the Nebraska way. That's not the way of the Unicam. Our leadership should be based on merit and should not be based on coercion or pressure to push a button a certain way, like a lot of other policy votes happen in here. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Frederickson. Senator Hunt, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon, Nebraskans. Good afternoon, colleagues. I am listening with an open mind. I can see the point that people like Senator Erdman are making when they talk about transparency. Transparency is one of my highest values. And I can see the point people like Senator Von Gilleren are making when they say none of our votes should be secret. We shouldn't be ashamed to stand by any vote that we make. I'm certainly not. But as everything is in this room, the way things ought to be is not the way things are. And we know how humans behave. And we've all been disappointed by each other. Let's be real, we've all been lied to by each other. Not all of us are liars, but we've all been lied to for sure. Like Senator Von Gillern, I also know people who lost committee chairs and then spent the entire rest of the session trying to get back at the people that they thought voted against them. But is that a fault of the process, or is that a fault of this weirdo who can't take a loss? If you really think about how much we all had to do to even get here in the first place. Call time, fundraising, telling your wife or husband what you're going to be doing to them for the next 4 to 8 years, knocking doors. Love my constituents, not personally my favorite thing to do, way to spend time. Everything we've had to go through to get here, and you're really going to get so wrapped around the axle because you lost one thing one time. I've seen it happen. We've all seen it happen. How weak must you be to have that be your whole thing? Loser energy. So I don't agree that the process creates conflict, as some have said. And I don't think that the fact that some people can't get themselves together, take a loss, means that we need to change the entire process. I think people need to change. I think they need to get over themselves. And I know something about getting over myself. Talking about transparency, a lot of you also lied is a strong word. I don't think lie is quite the right accurate word, but a lot of you strongly misrepresented your own positions to your constituents when you were campaigning. I know many of you assured your constituents, and they remind you all the time, that you weren't going to support an abortion ban. And here you are last year voting for an abortion ban. Why did you do that? Partisan pressure. When you're going door to door and you shake the hand of a constituent and they say, I've had a complicated pregnancy, my wife had a miscarriage, I support a woman's right to choose, whatever it is they're telling you, and you look them in the face and you say to them, I will not vote for an abortion ban. That's not why I'm running. I'm running to reduce property taxes, to stop brain drain, to support small businesses. I support agriculture and farmers. That's what you guys all do to get here. And then you come in here and you make social issues your entire identity. Is that a lie? I don't know if it's a lie, but it shows how you can be bullied. And I know that so many of you can be bullied because I bully you, and it works. Because sometimes I throw my weight around and you take it. Is that great? No. But it's sometimes the way things happen. The other thing that has to be said is the same people who are calling for transparency in this vote, the reason you know that this is a purely partisan endeavor, the only reason they want transparency around this one thing is to increase their party control so they can use the threat of loss of power, loss of positions on committees, loss of thank you, Mr. President, loss of fundraising capacity, so that they can wave around the vote card and say, here's how Senator so-and-so voted. They didn't vote for me, and now we're going to punish them for the rest of the year. But then the same people talking about that are going to come to us later here, having done a total 180, tie themselves in knots, explaining why we shouldn't allow the press in our executive sessions. So you want transparency when you can bully your colleagues, but you don't want it when the press and journalists are reporting on what it is that we are doing. Senator Von Gillern says, when has a secret action taken by a politician benefited the people they serve? I say the same thing applies to executive sessions. Let the press watch. If you're so proud of what you do in here, let them report on it. And let's preserve the nonpartisan nature of this institution and keep these secret ballots so we can have merit-based leadership in this body. Thank you, Mr. President.
That's your time. Thank you, Senator Hunt. Senator Dungan, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I do rise today in favor of this motion to recommit to committee. I stand opposed to this rule change. And I stand opposed to this rule change for a couple of reasons. And I want to kind of take a step back and talk a little bit about some things that were said earlier on the mic, because I think we need to frame this conversation properly when we're talking about modifying this rule. There's been conversation about the word transparency. and whether or not we believe in transparency. And it seems like there's this sort of overarching belief that if you believe in transparency here, then you should believe X, Y, and Z also. I don't believe that a lot of the rules we're talking about that have been proposed by Senator Erdman or by Senator Arch are necessarily analogous. And I don't believe that if you believe in one of these and you have to vote the same way on the other, I just think there's no through line between them that connects it. And let me talk more about that. When we're talking about what we're trying to accomplish with a particular rule, we need to have a conversation about what is the goal. Is the goal to effectuate the nonpartisan nature of the legislature continuing in the way that it has operated? Is the goal to ensure the public's oversight and the second house, the people's house, being able to see what we're doing in committee sessions? Or is the goal to allow outside pressure and frankly, capital P politics getting involved in the interworkings of this body? Earlier, Senator Erdman was speaking and he said, even though this is a nonpartisan body, we all know it's not nonpartisan. And I hear that same claim made when I talk to constituents or friends of mine who say, oh, why do you always talk about why it's nonpartisan? Clearly it's a partisan body. But I think that the problem with that is it misunderstands what it means to be a nonpartisan body. We know who the Democrats are in here. We know who the Republicans are in here. We know who the nonpartisans are in here. That's easily known. It's readily known. But that does not make this a partisan body with regards to the structure and the operations with which we conduct ourselves. A couple of other senators have hinted at this already, but other bodies, other legislatures, other senates in other states that are partisan operate completely differently than us. They have minority whips, majority whips. They have party folks who come in and essentially tell you how to vote. And if you are a freshman senator in a partisan body, you likely are never going to have your bill see the light of day. You're likely never going to be given the opportunity to be in a leadership position. And you got to work your way up through what that party wants you to do. We don't operate that way. The Nebraska legislature is nonpartisan insofar as we are 49 senators who come in here and have our independent voices and our independent beliefs heard with equal power across the spectrum. And what we seek to do with regards to the way that we elect our committee chairs and our speaker and other positions with regards to a ballot that can't be seen is not to hide the information from the public of how we operate as a body. It's to ensure that the body remains nonpartisan and free from coercion and collusion from those outside sources. It's been repeated ad nauseum. You can tell people who you voted for. If somebody asks, you could probably have that conversation, and a lot of people are happy to do that. But what we seek to achieve by maintaining the integrity of our election system with regards to how we pick our individual chairs is to make sure that the best person for the job is getting it, not the person that people feel like they have to vote for. And I think that's of the utmost importance. We have to continue to maintain that integrity. And that doesn't make us partisan. We are still different than the other bodies. And the fact that we are nonpartisan is unique. And when I was talking actually in a conference this summer to a state senator from Minnesota, I was explaining to her the way that our system worked, and she was blown away. And it wasn't insofar as she didn't think it would work. It was, wow, that must be great. She was talking to me about the fact that we have an opportunity as freshman senators to have a say. Thank you, Mr. President, to have our voice heard. And frankly, regardless of whether or not you're a Democrat or a Republican, the current structure that we have and that we have had for quite some time ensures that the best person for a job can be elected. And when I talk to my constituents about this, they ask, why do you support that secret ballot? It takes about 10 seconds worth of talking to explain to them why it operates the way it has and how it's always operated that way, and they agree with me. The emails that I've got from constituents say, please maintain the integrity of our body. Do not let them take that away, and don't make this a hyper-partisan body. We're not DC, we're not Minnesota, we're Nebraska, and we need to maintain that. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Duncan. Senator Merman, you're recognized to speak.
Question.
The question has been called. Do I see 5 hands? I do. The question is, shall debate cease? All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. There's been a request for a call of the House. The question is, shall the House go under call? All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
28 ayes, 1 nay to place the House under call.
The House is under call. Senators, please record your presence. Those unexcused senators outside the chamber, please return to the chamber and record your presence. All unauthorized personnel, please leave the floor. The House is under call. Senator Vargas, please return to the chamber and record your presence. The House is under call. Senator Dover, please check in. Senator Halloran, please state your point of order.
I would like to have a secret ballot on this, please. Yeah, okay. Senator Conrad said she would let me know how she votes, but I don't go to her Facebook page, so I wouldn't know that. I withdraw that point of order. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Halloran. All unexcused members are now present. The question is, shall debate We had a vote open. Senator Erdman, would you accept call-in votes?
Yes.
Yes. We are now accepting call-in votes to cease debate.
Senator Linehan voting yes. Senator Dungan voting no. Senator Armendariz voting yes. Senator Day voting no. Senator Brandt voting yes. Senator Von Gillern voting yes. Senator Mosier voting yes. Senator Hughes voting yes. Senator Ballard voting yes. Senator Brewer voting yes. Senator McKinney voting no. Senator Hansen voting yes. Senator Boston voting yes. Senator Dover voting yes. Senator Conrad voting no. Senator Slama voting yes. Senator Wishart voting no. Senator Arch voting yes. Senator Reapy voting yes. Senator Bostman voting yes. Senator Lippincott voting yes. Senator Clements voting yes. Vote is 26 ayes, 8 nays, Mr. President, to cease debate.
Debate does cease. Senator Conrad, you're recognized to close.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon, colleagues. Before I reaffirm some of the underlying issues and considerations in regards to whether or not this proposed rule change is meritorious in our nonpartisan unicameral legislature, I do just want to note for the record that on historically, one of the most contentious issues before the legislature, and definitely the most contentious issue that we've faced together this year in this short session, not even 2 hours went by. Not even 2 hours went by on one of the most important hallmarks of our unique institution of government. People were not filing dilatory measures. Everybody was on task. The queue had over 15 people in it. And the only deliberative body in this state has chosen not even to devote 2 hours of discussion to our unique aspects and form of government, which, by the way, you all took an oath to uphold in running and serving in a nonpartisan unicameral legislature, whose one of its hallmarks is to ensure nonpartisanship by design in leadership contests and otherwise. So the record is clear on that, as are your votes in that regard. And I think that speaks for itself and is disappointing. Nevertheless, colleagues, I fully support and share your values when it comes to openness in government and transparency. And I don't need anyone on this floor or otherwise to impugn my character about how I go about my service in that regard. I am proud and happy to share with anyone who seeks my vote for a leadership position how I will cast my vote. And I have an opportunity to do that through secret ballot, to guard against factions, to ensure collegiality, to ensure nonpartisanship, as our rules have always afforded our ability to do so. And no other member should have the right to tell me how to do my job as a state senator, because that's up to my constituents, not you. If you choose to follow the leadership of moneyed interests and partisan interests and failed political candidates that seek to divide us with measures like this, that's your choice. But you don't need to change the rules, except for to show that you're following those interests as an accountability measure. You can take a ballot selfie. You can give a nomination or support speech. You can ask for a point of personal privilege and announce your vote to everyone, as Senator Hudskins did years ago. You have plenty of remedies available to you to show how you're casting your vote. You have not sought them, and you're not interested in seeking them now because you're interested in undermining the institution that you took an oath to serve, and you're more interested in showing party bosses and moneyed interests where your allegiances are, and they should be with the vote of the people. With that, Mr. President, I would ask for a favorable vote in regards to the motion to recommit to committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Conrad. Members, the question is the motion to recommit to committee. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
11 ayes, 28 nays, Mr. President, to recommit to committee.
The motion fails. I raise the call. Mr. Clerk, next item.
Mr. President, Senator Conrad would move to reconsider the vote just taken on the recommit motion.
Senator Conrad, you're recognized to open.
Thank you, Mr. President. And again, good afternoon, colleagues. I was actually really looking forward to today's rules debate because I knew that we were going to have an opportunity to take up a measure of great importance to each member of this body and to members of the public who are watching very carefully how we conduct ourselves in regards to this debate and the results and outcome. And I find it incredibly sad that less than 2 hours into our most important debate of the session thus far, the majority of the body has saw fit to limit debate, including with many members who share your point of view who are in the queue and had yet an opportunity to even speak or weigh in, utilizing their talents, their experience, their perspectives, sharing voice from their district. And I think that's a disservice to the debate and to the institution. But it also goes to show what we already know to be true. If the majority of this body is hell-bent on undermining the nonpartisan unicameral legislature, you have the ability to do so. And you're going to do so. But that's not even good enough anymore. To undermine our traditions, to undermine our power, to undermine our independence, to win at all costs. There was a lot of big talk over the summer and in the news leading up to this legislative session about we're going to go 60 days to show folks that we disagree with how we're going to rewrite the rule book. Well, you didn't even last 2 hours. You couldn't even respond to the thoughtful ideas that were brought forward that may have disagreed with your own. There was no dialogue, there was no deliberation, and you couldn't even be bothered to allow people who disagree with your perspective to have a voice. To let Nebraskans know that we don't speak with one voice on these issues, that we have the ability to stand witness, that we can and we should take up tough issues through thoughtful deliberation and debate, and stay in relationship with each other during that opportunity, which I am pleased to do. Nothing has changed my warm feelings for each of my colleagues, and I'm grateful for their sacrifice and service in being here. But as a 10-member of this institution, with only my friend Senator Aguilar having more seniority than myself, I can tell you that this is not in line with our proud political traditions. To eschew different points of view, to stymie debate, to utilize the tyranny of the majority to change the unique features and hallmarks of this proud institution, which has stood the test of time for almost 90 years against partisan and moneyed interests who seek to take it down at every turn. I think it's helpful to hear all perspectives. I was eager to hear more ideas from more colleagues about how they were viewing this proposal. But you couldn't even stand debate for 2 hours on what you claim to be, and I agree to be, one of the most important issues that we've taken up thus far. That's a disservice to the debate, to the institution, to the public, and to each other. I wasn't planning to file a motion to reconsider until I saw how that shameful behavior was playing out. And now we will take more time to talk more about this very important issue. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Conrad. Senator Clemens, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I stand in opposition to the motion to reconsider that vote, and I believe calling the question was proper because people were not discussing the recommit motion. They were discussing the rule. The recommit motion had been discussed almost hardly any. And if we want to discuss the rule, we should get to the rule on the board. The proposal on the board was recommit to committee. And so regarding the reconsider motion, I oppose it. And the reason is because I want to get to a vote on the rule, because we senators don't just represent our own interests when we vote. We are representing about 40,000 people in our districts when we vote. Our constituents can see how we vote on all other issues. The people deserve to see how we represented them when we cast their vote for leadership in the legislature, like we cast their vote for bills and resolutions. So I would like to get to a vote on this rule, and I oppose the reconsider motion. I yield the rest of my time to Senator Erdman.
Senator Erdman, you have 3 minutes, 23 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Clements. I appreciate that. Senator Conrad has the opinion that what we say here on the floor changes someone's mind. There is probably not a person in this room that has listened to the debate on this issue and have changed their mind. When I came in 17, Senator Hughes counseled me one day and he said, I want you to understand something. All the rhetoric that goes on the floor probably doesn't change anybody's mind. So a lot of times, Senator Hughes said, I don't get involved because I realize it's not going to change anybody. So I would say if I had a show of hands and ask them to raise their hand that they've changed their mind because of something Senator Conrad or myself or anyone else said, there would not be a hand go up. So we've had full and fair debate at 2 hours because everybody already knows how they're going to vote. So the issue that we have to deal with is, does the Constitution mean every vote needs to be open and public? That's what it says. The Constitution in Article 3 says all votes shall be via voca, which means open voting or in person or voice voting. Now, the Supreme Court has ruled that if you vote on the board, that is considered open voting. They have not ruled on the secret ballot. So in George Norris's petition that he put together to start the unicameral, it says that one senator can call for a voice vote. One. So the comment was made earlier why no one raised a finger, was the quote, when we elected Senator Aguilar and Lowe at the beginning of this session. I had decided to do that. I was going to do that. And I spoke with Senator Wayne and I asked him this question. If I do that, will I be perceived as to wasting time like other people do?
1 minute.
And he said, probably you will. So I chose not to, because I wanted to try to start this session on the right foot, trying to get along, trying to be congenial, trying to be collegial and all those things. So I didn't do it. But I can tell you right now, if this rule does not pass, I recommend anybody that comes here in 25 through those doors on the first day, right after they put up a motion to elect a chairperson, you make the motion for a roll call vote. Make the motion for a roll call vote, because it has never been tried in any court that says that secret vote is considered an open vote. That's the question that we have to answer. It's not how Senator Conrad feels and how she feels disenfranchised because she didn't get to talk for 45 minutes. Okay, none of that. It's about, what does it mean? What does the Constitution mean? And of course, the thing is a living document. You know, it changes as time goes by. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Erdman and Clemens. Senator Hansen, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, I'd like to first mention that I'm not in favor of the reconsider the vote and the recommit to committee by Senator Conrad. I kind of get where she's coming from. She's fighting the good fight from her opinion. I would disagree on quite a few things that she said that I'm not going to get too much into, but when she starts talking about the tyranny of the majority, just because we're actually, using the rules as appropriately as they're written, and we feel like the conversation should move on, and Senator Clemens even brought up that we're not even discussing the recommit, and so I think it's an appropriate time to bring that up. I remember one time when I first called the question, I think on one of the first rule changes, we even discussed with Senator Conrad to see if it was okay we get things moving on, and she agreed, and that was under 2 hours. But now for some reason on this, it's the end of the world. So I think it is the appropriate time to use to call the question and get things moving along here. So anyway, back to the underlying rule change. I do appreciate Senator Erdman for bringing this. This is probably one of the biggest rule changes that have been brought to my attention by my constituents. I know sometimes me in some of our districts, constituents, may not mention this to us very much because it's not as important to them, whereas some other rule changes might be. But in my district, I probably had the most emails, the most correspondence, talks around the water cooler. Some of my patients bring this up to me about how we're going to be bringing up open ballots and where my vote is at and how they're in favor of it. I think from a voter or constituent perspective, and I don't think we're sometimes gives the people in Nebraska enough credit that they do understand what's going on here in the legislature, how things work, how we vote, what it means when we vote for a committee chair or not. I think a lot of them understand that. I think sometimes get so introspective in our little bubble here that we only think it's what we think. But I know voters know who I vote for on committee chairs. And they know they're philosophically aligned with maybe another committee chair that I might be or I might not be. And it's my job to explain to them why I didn't. It's also, I feel, my job as a colleague of somebody running for a chair to either tell them yes or no. I've had to do it with some of my other colleagues here on the floor who are more, who might have an R or D behind their name. But again, that's the great thing about the nonpartisan perspective of the legislature is that we don't have R or Ds behind our name when we run for a committee chair. So I like the idea, and I think so do my constituents, of knowing where my vote goes for a committee chair, because they want to know they have certain perspectives of where the state of Nebraska should go, and sometimes because of the power of a committee chair, that determines where their interests lie as well. So I think it is just fine that we let the people know where we are at, and I have no problem sharing that with anybody who asks me. But even sometimes not in my district, they want to know where I'm at. So, and I think that does kind of cut down on some of the animosity that we sometimes see in the legislative floor about who didn't vote for me and who did. Unfortunately, that's just the way, I think Senator Hunt brought it up, that's just unfortunate sometimes that happens when it comes to sharing or not sharing your opinion about somebody. So I won't braid the subject too much longer, so I just like to say that I'm in favor of this rule change, and I encourage my colleagues to vote green on the underlying rule. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Hansen. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. 12 people were in the queue when the question was called, 8 Republicans and 4 Democrats. So the fact that people weren't talking about the motion to recommit, well, there were 12 people that weren't given an opportunity to talk about it or not talk about it. I stand in support of Senator Conrad's motion to reconsider the motion to recommit to committee. There you go. I've talked about it. Now I can spend the remainder of my time on the microphone talking about the rule itself, which is oftentimes the practice. When we are on a bill or an amendment, people don't necessarily speak to the specific item at the bottom of the board. They might speak to any item on the board. And I choose, with my time, to speak to the rule itself. This rule purports transparency in how we govern. Transparency for the people of Nebraska. Yet, in the past 10 days, several of my colleagues have introduced significant numbers of legislation that seek to erode the transparency of this state. LB 1417 is just one example, and I haven't gotten my whole way through it because it's got a lot in it. But if you go to page 22 of this 101-page document, you will see on line 9 that it eliminates the Foster Care Advisory Committee beginning in 2025. And not only does it do that, but it takes on page 23, line 24, it starts and it goes over to the next page. The Nebraska Child Abuse Prevention Fund Board is eliminated also in 2025, and the funds of that board go to DHHS to distribute. And I'm sure they will do it all in draft form so that they can't be FOIA'd. We should be critically concerned about the concerted, targeted effort of this administration in collaboration with some of my colleagues to erode the transparency of this government. Instead of fighting over whether or not you want to tell your friends who you voted for, tell whoever you want who you voted for. Protect the institution. I did not vote for myself when I ran against Senator Aguilar. I voted for no one. I voted for Senator McKinney for vice chair. We have a disproportionate number of people from the 3rd Congressional District on the executive board. Our largest populations are underrepresented on the executive board. There you go. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. You all can do it too. You all can take your turn on the mic and you can say who you voted for what. It doesn't have to be forced. If you believe this in your heart and soul, then just do it. And Senator Erdman, if you really truly believed in this, you would have stood up and you would have made that motion when I ran against Senator Aguilar. Wasting time. Doing our jobs is not wasting time. If this is what you truly believed in, then you should have been brave enough to be viewed as wasting time. But this is wasting time. You submitted a rule mid-biennium that won't even take effect until you are gone from this body. You had a public hearing, and now we have had a week of debate on rules. That is wasting time. Period. And if you think that people view the time being wasted this week as it's those that are fighting back, no. Everyone knows that none of us would be talking about this if you hadn't introduced these rules. You are wasting the time. You are wasting our time. You are wasting the people's time. You are wasting the time that we could be working on things like feeding children. You are the one who is wasting time. And I am sorry, colleagues, if you're bored, this is our job.
That's your time, Senator. Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Holcroft, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I rise in opposition to the reconsideration and the recommit and in favor of the rule change. And my comments are about the rule change. Honor, courage, commitment. These are the core values of the United States Navy. Honor, courage, commitment. I lived under these core values while in the Navy, and I try to live under them today. A secret ballot is inconsistent to these core values. Let me tell you why. First, honor. And these are quotations from the Navy's website. Honor. I am accountable for my professional and personal behavior. I will be mindful of the privilege I have to serve my fellow Americans. How can one be accountable with a secret ballot? Courage, the value that gives me the moral and mental strength to do what is right, with confidence and resolution, even in face of temptation and adversity. Adversity, like intimidation and coercion. Bring it on.
Commitment. The day-to-day duty of every man and woman in the Department of the Navy to join as a team to improve the quality of our work, our people, and ourselves. Teams are not built with secret ballots. Honor, courage, commitment. Because of these core values, I cannot support a secret ballot, and I support this rule change. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Holcroft. Senator Hardin, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in opposition to the reconsider as well as to the recommit, and I support rule change number 3. I simply want to point out that the people in Banner County, Kimball County, Scottsbluff County who have contacted me and been texting me throughout the day today are deeply concerned about any kind of a secret ballot that takes place. Regardless of what we think about it from one another in here, people way out west essentially look at it and say, why on earth would we have secret ballots? This makes no sense to us. They're listening to the arguments, and I think that we have a responsibility to them first. We have a responsibility to them before we begin to invoke things about the institution, before we begin to invoke traditions and other kinds of things. The people back there are looking at it and saying, wait a minute, there's a disconnect. We expect that kind of transparency among ourselves and that kind of integrity. How come you aren't doing the same thing in your committee votes and so on and so forth? I think we owe it to the people back home to be very open and accountable with what we're doing. And Senator Erdman, would you like more time? I'd yield the rest of my time to you if you can use it.
Senator Erdman, you have 3 minutes, 30 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Senator Hardin. I appreciate that. Senator Kavanaugh correctly stated that some of these rule changes I will not be affected by. I get that. And as I said a week ago or so when we started this, some have asked, why are you so concerned about the rules that you will never be able to use or that will affect you? Well, Senator Kavanaugh, the answer is I took this oath to do this job, and I plan on doing it until the 60th day serving here, and then until the 1st of January or the 5th of January in 25. I don't plan on giving up. I don't plan on changing my commitment because I'm a lame duck or going to be termed out. What I intended to do by rewriting the rules as we did and spent hundreds of hours doing that was to make lives better, debate better, the way we pass laws better in this legislative body when I leave, to leave it in a better position than it was when I came. This body is more divided today than it ever has been. This body is now proving that the nonpartisan designation is on paper only. There is no such thing as nonpartisan. And 20 years ago or longer, when my son served here, it wasn't as it is today. And people say, well, what has happened? Well, what has happened is we have become a divided nation. And we become divided for this reason. We continue to call attention to the differences we have as Americans. We may have different colored skin, we may have come from a different location on the planet, but we're all Americans now. And that used to be something that brought us together. Today, we're talking about diversion and inclusion and diversity and all of those things that have divided us.
1 minute.
And when I was growing up, I had a lot of friends that had different colored skin. They were my friends. I didn't look at them as being something different. They were Americans. They were my friends. So what we have today is a division in the country that has shown itself here. And what we're trying to do is pass common sense rules that everybody can abide by, and the minority can be protected, and the majority can have somewhat of control, because we don't have any now because the minority has the authority. But remember, common sense is a flower that doesn't grow in everybody's garden. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Erdman. Senator Linehan, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon, colleagues. So I'm against the motion to reconsider, and I support the underlying amendment. I don't want to raise the temperature at all in the room. I do believe, and Senator Von Gillern mentioned this, I've told him, my first year here, we had elections the first day, and that class, one member of the class lost, well, it was class behind, I guess, lost the speakership by, I don't remember, 2 or 3 votes. That hung over until those people left because somebody lied to somebody. And it seems like every cycle, except maybe the last time we came back this time, that happened. Somebody was misinformed about how somebody was going to vote. Now, Senator DeBoer talked about Senator Lindstrom and my election. I think I had 2 more votes than Senator Lindstrom. I didn't know I had 25 when I came to the floor. I didn't have 25 when I came to the floor, neither did he. Because there were 2 or 3 people that had told both of us they didn't know, and it turned out they didn't. So that I think, I give most credit to Senator Lindstrom. He never was angry. He didn't pout. He stayed on the committee, and he was one of my best committee members. But in other cases, we never moved past that. We never moved past the anger. And I also find it kind of ironic because, as Senator Conrad said, I think Senator Frederickson said, maybe others, they tell people how they vote. I tell people how I vote. I would say 75 to 80% of the people in the body are real forthright and honest about how they vote. But you get 5 or 6 people, and the other thing that's ironic, and I'm sure I'm hitting on some rail I'm not supposed to politically, but you all know after the bills I've introduced the last 5 days, I'm not running for anything ever again, so I can hit on a lot of rails now. This editorial by former senators, I just find it kind of humorous because the vast majority of them are from the Republican Party, and they're the ones that want to hide it. It's actually not the Democrats that are afraid. They're, from my experience, the people that I've worked with here, I've always, Patty Panzenbrook, good friend. I remember explicitly she telling me she was going to vote for something once, and I'm like, Patty, you can't do that. Wayne, just Senator Wayne and I vote differently 90% of the time, but he's one of my best friends. The secret ballot creates distrust amongst the 49. And it's used almost extensively by people who run as Republicans, say they're Republican, tell people they're going to vote certain ways, and come here and don't do that. That's who uses this. It's not Democrats. And that's why I just find this whole thing ironic. When Senator Conrad stands up, I bet she always told people how she was going to vote. It's kind of her personality. She's not shy. I don't think Senator Kavanaugh's would mislead anybody. And I do think sometimes people don't know. And I'm not going to out the people that told me after they voted for me that they did decide that morning.
1 minute.
But I really, in my heart, and I understand I'm not judging anybody how you vote, but I really, in my heart, think it's very bad when the first day of a new legislature, 4 or 5 people walk out of here thinking they can't trust anybody in the body. That's why I'm for open vote. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Linehan. Senator Erdman, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you again. I appreciate that. And Senator Linehan, I appreciate what you had to say there. We've had several instances like Senator Linehan described. And when we were in the Rules Committee meeting, one of our committee people had a similar situation where they had a number of votes that they had calculated and they didn't get the number they thought they were going to. And they figured out who it was that didn't vote for them. But it was a situation where you have to try to decide or try to figure out who it is. And I thought that Senator Holcroft spoke eloquently about what it means to be trustworthy. And that's what this is all about. We have had numerous times since I've been here in the 7 years I've been here that folks had 28, 27, 28 commitments and wind up with 24 and spend significant amount of time trying to figure out who the 4 were that changed their mind. If we had open voting, you'd know exactly who changed their mind. They would have to come and face you and say, here's why I changed my mind. Then you would know. And maybe they had a reason that was valid. This last election cycle, I had a person call and ask for my vote. And that person happened to be a Republican. And I said, I will not vote for you. And here's the reason why. And they accepted that. They said, I understand. So I think that's the way to head up your conversation with someone who you're either going to vote for or not vote for. Just be honest with them. Let them know up front. And as I alluded to earlier, we've had people here in this body that even if you got them to sign a document on their own letterhead, would try to renege on what they said. That is an issue that open voting would solve, is that people would know exactly if they're people of the word or not. Because you see, all we have is our word. And if your word doesn't mean nothing, that's a very sad position to be in. And so what we're asking today is help us keep each other honest so that we can be trusted. And so I would encourage you to vote against the reconsider motion and to adopt rule number 3. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Erdman. Senator Halloran, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I've learned a lot here today, and it's kind of in conflict with what I have learned all my life about, has been said many times, about keeping your word, creating trust. If you don't have that, you don't have anything. But on this floor, I guess I've been being taught by some people that secrecy is better than transparency. I guess I have probably wasted not wasted, but I have learned that I should have conducted my married life just a little bit different. You know, from what I've heard on the floor, secrets are okay. It breeds trust. Well, if I'd have known that in my lifetime of marriage, I would have maybe been better off having kept more secrets. Now, some people are laughing at that, and they should. And I hope if my wife's watching, honey, I haven't kept any secrets from you. But that being said, I mean, on the floor, there's been some things said I have to challenge just a little bit. It's been mentioned on the floor that there's a difference between a ballot and a bill. A bill is a public thing, right? We're talking about an issue. In a ballot, well, voting between one person or another, that's a private thing. Well, I have news for everybody here. You're all doing public service. There's nothing private about our lives when we're conducting business in this body. I had earlier passed around, and I wish the folks at home had it in front of them so they could see it, a document that was drafted by George Norris, the father of the unicameral. And it was language drafted by him that created the unicameral. It's initiative petition language. And it passed in 1937. I had a senator come up to me and said, "Senator, did this pass?" Yes, it did. 1937, George Norris drafted this language and it passed an initiative petition and we became a unicameral, a nonpartisan unicameral. And oh, by the way, I used to have a friend, bless his heart, who wasn't maybe the most stable person in the world, and he had a cat. And he kept referring to that cat as a dog. Over and over and over again, he referred to that cat as a dog. And I said, Joe, a cat's not a dog, and you can call that cat a dog all you want, and it doesn't make it a dog. It's the same argument can be made about partisan and nonpartisan. We can claim that this is a nonpartisan body, but the fact of the matter is, it's a cat. It's a partisan body. People that elect us know who we are based upon our platform and what we say we're going to do and not do if we're elected. And it's pretty evident to them whether we're one party or the other. It's no secret. And they elect us based on that platform, and here we are. And there's an expectation once we get here, we're supposed to forget our principles that we got elected on and cast fate to the wind and tell our voters back home, sorry, I fooled you. Fool me once, fool you twice. I must have fooled you. And that happens in some elections. Didn't happen in mine. My constituents knew who they were voting for. And like so many people here have said, I'm getting texts from people back home saying, what are you talking about? Why is this an issue? Why is there anything secret in the legislature? And I have no trouble telling them why it is. It's tradition. Well, if you read this initiative that I passed around, it's highlighted in pink in the initiative. It says the request from any one member to be sufficient to secure a roll call on any question. George Norris, if he was anything, he was Mr. Transparent. He pushed for a one-house system because he found flaws in a two-house system. I would argue against some of his argument, but he found arguments in a two-house system that there wasn't transparency. And yet here we are, 80 plus years later, extolling George Norris as the founder of the unicameral, but flying in the face of what he was asking for, transparency. We'll have some people vote to continue to have the secret ballot. I'm against the recommit committee and the reconsider motion, and I encourage voting for Rule 3. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Halloran. Senator Hughes, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I raised to share with my colleagues some words that were shared on this floor several years ago on this very rule. This is someone we all know. Here are his words. I didn't anticipate speaking this early on the session, but I am 100% opposed to Senator Halloran's rule proposal. And I think if you're going to consider it, let's understand what we're doing here. This proposal is less about transparency, and it is absolutely about dismantling this unicameral, in my opinion. Every action has a reaction. Every single action we take here has a reaction. Sure, you start with public votes for leadership. The forces of partisanship, which were rejected by the voters in 1934, are back. Suddenly, you have a minority and you have a majority. Suddenly, you have a majority leader and you have a minority leader. And guess what, fellow Republicans? All of the Democrats then get together because they aren't on committees anymore. Steve Lathrop's not walking up the stairs with a plan to fix corrections. He's walking up the stairs to see how many bombs he can throw so that all the rest of the Republicans don't get what they need this year. And suddenly the Republicans start having the same deal. I'm a brand new state senator. I come from Norfolk. There's a majority leader, there's a whip, there's everything else. Do I have the chance to fix problems at my regional center on day one? No, I do not. I have to go through leadership chain. And you're right, Senator Wayne, the speaker's position has gotten more powerful, and the power of the individual is eroded with something like this. Public votes to contribute to more of a hyper-partisan approach that dismisses the minority. I mentioned it briefly. Senator Bostar comes to work. He's already the only Democrat on the entire Revenue Committee. He made somebody mad. He ended up on both of the most Republican committees in the place, but that becomes the norm for everybody. And trust me, I've seen this play out before. I'm a Republican. You know, if I do the math, it works out great. But what happens when it's not about Republicans or Democrats anymore? It's about urban and rural. Rural loses 2 more seats this year. Suddenly, the urban senators decide we're absolutely not going to send one dime to Norfolk or Madison. They organize. Everything has a reaction. You do this, there's going to be a reaction. Do the math. The math is never going to be on your side because it's always going to turn. In 20 years, this place could be full of Democrats and we'll be on the other side and we'll rue the day that we did this. The other thing that I want to talk about is what's the most honest. What is the most honest? Being elected by your colleagues on a secret ballot or being elected on a public ballot? If we want to elect the best people to run the committees, you have to be willing to have a secret ballot. And in most cases, transparency, I get it. It's a great argument. And it's very much in favor of the folks that want this rule change. But let's step back for a second. If this were a bicameral, absolutely. But we did not inherit a bicameral. We inherited a unicameral. And if it's going to work the way it was intended, you cannot do things like this. And a lot of people stood up on the first day and asked for my vote as a committee chair, and I took great notes. And the things they said that they were for, I'm for the institution, I'm for making this place run, I'm going to protect the institution against all foes. They stood up and they grabbed what everybody wanted to say. This is the unicameral and we're going to make it keep working. But if you vote today to go the other way, you're not voting for the institution. You're voting to change this to something that's partisan. You're voting to change this to a majority and a minority. And people like me that have discounted ideas on an issue suddenly don't get to speak. It falls apart. And I know Senator Groney and I are going to be on opposite sides of this issue. And I want to explore and understand Senator Halloran's references to Article 3 in the state constitution as it relates to public votes. I think that something that counts may weigh in before we do, but it's going to be an interesting discussion. But I'm saying I'm presenting on behalf of the people of Madison and Stanton County. I say no. I think this is a bad idea. And if we want to go down this road and you vote for it and it passes, things will change and not for the better. And wait for the day that you're not in the majority and wait for the day, thank you, Mr. President, that you're in rural Nebraska and you lose again because we are losing people, we are losing seats, and we will lose funding. Colleagues, this was then Senator Mike Flood's, now U.S. Congressman's, words on January 21st, 2021 on this very rule change. Please take time to consider the impact of this rule change, not on what it will do today or tomorrow, but down the road when things change. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Hughes. Senator Vargas, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you very much, President. Realizing that I'm following Senator Conrad, she writes her notes on
Backs of envelopes.
on the back of envelopes. I'm going to get you a notepad. Thank you very much to Senator Hughes for those words. As I've been listening, there's a couple things that come to mind. One, I stand in support of the recommit to committee motion and stand in opposition to the underlying rule. And I want to say it's not because my opinions don't change. You know, I think we can all have different opinions on this. I know Senator Erdman said that our minds don't change, but I think that they can. Maybe they don't for most people, or the overwhelming majority of people, they don't change. But it might be that some people, when they're deciding who they're going to vote for leadership, might change their minds in the midst of speeches, in the midst of the different candidates that are announcing. Not everybody's announced right beforehand, which means that sometimes people may change their minds. It just may not be Senator Erdman, and that might be okay if he doesn't decide to change his mind. But I think that this concept, at least for me personally, about this is inherently more about culture and also about what is working best, not what's right or wrong. If we lead this conversation with what's right or wrong, my biggest concern is we sort of look down on what the body has done for a significant amount of time. And, you know, there's people that are on this local view, obviously, Senator Hadley and Senator Adams, you know, former speakers, but there's other individuals that I know that I've served with, Senator Coltman, Senator Stinner, and Senator Hilkeman, and others. That's what I was used to in terms of individuals that I'd served with that are no longer here right now, Senator Lindstrom as well. But I know that if this is about what's right or wrong, we sort of lose a little bit of the momentum of the conversation, because the rules have instilled this nonpartisan legislature, and it has clearly worked for a Republican majority in terms of affiliation of senators in this body for decades. So the question of whether or not this is right or wrong in terms of transparency or truth or trust, the bigger question I ask is, if this worked for transparency, trust, relationships for the majority of members for decades, is the problem or the issue more with that they were more wrong, or that we really need to be much more mindful of the decisions we're making and how it's going to affect not traditions for me, but the culture of the nonpartisan legislature? It leans me that more of the answer has to do with the culture of the nonpartisan legislature. Because if the party system continues to make its way into influencing people's decisions, and I agree with what some people said, we do have party affiliations. It's not the only thing that defines us. At least I don't believe it's the only thing that defines me. Can't speak for everyone, but I could say for the majority of people that I've talked to, it's not the only thing that defines them. And for different people, it may define them more than others. Their identity might be more aligned with their party affiliation. But I think it is clear to say that preserving these relationships does go hand in hand with working together and having a productive session, not whether or not this rule is changed. If that, accept that premise, that means that there were not good working relationships for decades prior to this. For the majority of people, this enabled the nonpartisan legislature to be able to select internal leadership positions. And they've maintained this process for decades because it was the best both for the state, for the legislature and the body, not for parties, not for other state legislatures, but for us. And I know we can debate individually whether or not we agree it is transparent or not transparent, it makes relationships worse or better. But I think there's something to say about that this has led to a majority of people not wanting to change this rule for the sake of the nonpartisan body of the legislature.
Time.
Thank
you, Senator Vargas. Senator John Kavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in support of the reconsideration motion and the motion to recommit. I support the reconsideration because I just assume everybody's going to change their vote after they hear what I have to say, because I didn't get to talk before when we supposedly had full and fair debate. I've been in the queue waiting the whole time. And I would echo Senator Conrad's comments about such a serious and consequential issue to the integrity of this body requires more deliberation and conversation, and people who want to be part of the conversation should be allowed to do that. Some folks just want to get things done, go real fast, get their way, push, bully, cajole to get their way. And that's kind of the reason for this rule, right? I know there are folks here who are saying, well, you can't bully me. I'll always tell you how I'm going to vote. That's not the point, right? The point of a secret ballot is not about preserving what it is you want, whether you want to keep your vote secret or whether you are going to stick to your word. It's about the body as a whole. It's about the future. It's about those folks who, as in Senator Linehan's example, who said they didn't know who they were going to vote for. And then when the rubber met the road, they did have to choose and they did vote, but they were able to preserve their relationship with Senator Lindstrom because they didn't publicly vote against him when he lost. Although you can maybe surmise if Senator Linehan won by 2 votes and there were 3 undecided votes at that point. But nonetheless, it's about those other incidences, those other times. It's not about somebody changing their mind or going against their word. And I would say to the folks who say we need to preserve our own honor and integrity, we need to make a public vote. And I guess to that I would say, when you are forced to do something, that is not a demonstration of your honorableness. The honorable thing to do is to do what you said you were going to do and not get credit for it, not get accolades, or to make the right decision despite what others might want you to do. Senator Linehan said the quiet part out loud. We need to make this rule change so that we can force Republicans to vote for Republicans. And you don't need me to tell you, like everyone else has told you, that that would inherently destroy the nonpartisan nature of this body. Mike Flood's speech that Senator Hughes read was a wonderful speech, that he was exactly right about what will happen if we did this. So we did inherit a nonpartisan unicameral body, and we struggle to maintain it in the current political climate we have, but we continue to maintain it. And that we have to preserve those institutional parts that allow us to maintain that nonpartisan body. I would say to, I think it was Senator Halloran who mentioned George W. Norris and his desire to get away from secrecy. I would encourage you to read Senator Norris's book, where he talks about his disdain for the bicameral federal Congress and the secrecy of the conference committee, which was his problem, that people could hide their votes behind the conference committee and jam things into bills. I think that's a much more apt point for a conversation about excluding the media from the executive sessions, because George Norris's concern was not about how we elected our committee chairs or how committee chairs were necessarily elected in federal Congress, although I would tell you he also did have a problem with the partisan bosses telling people who was going to be committee chair and who was next in line, which is what you run the risk of doing by adopting this rule. But he was concerned with people hiding behind hiding their policy decisions and hiding their votes on laws behind that. And that is what is the attempt to, in the hiding of executive sessions from the media. People who say you can't have that conversation, you need to have the closed doors so you can have a candid conversation. They're trying to hide their opinion from you. And that's an opinion on the very...
That's your time,
Thank
Senator.
you. I didn't get my minute, Mr. Lieutenant Governor, but thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Kauth, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. First, I'd like to say I rise in opposition to the recommit and reconsider and in full support of the amendment. I'm a little surprised when I hear people talking about how we have to maintain the nonpartisanship of the body and really make sure the legislature doesn't change. Last year clearly illustrated how partisan this body truly is, and I heard more times, probably once a day, this has never happened before. So I'm a little confused by the hypocrisy of that. But I rise in support of this amendment because we are adults who are here to hold difficult conversations and make difficult decisions. We need to be able to tell someone honestly why we do or do not support their candidacy for a chair. And if we lose, we need to be adult enough to accept gracefully and commit to do the work. I have also heard many senators talking about the need for transparency. Let's start with us. The reasoning that factions will form if we have transparency regarding voting is flawed. Those factions are already well established, and there's very active partisanship on both sides. But knowing that and acknowledging each other's point of view actually builds more trust and respect. And there are plenty of senators here who I disagree with, who disagree with me, but we find commonalities to work on. We build on the fact that we trust each other enough to say the truth. Are your relationships so fragile that they cannot withstand disagreement and disappointment? And how do we know that it's the best? Have we actually tried it? Again, we're standing on something that has been tradition for a very long time, and we're in a much different place. Thank you. I yield my time.
Thank you, Senator Kauth. Senator Raybould, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to continue my support of the reconsideration and the recommit to committee. You know what I love? We have this pamphlet that we hand to visitors who visit the Capitol. It's called One House in Brief. And I love the bullet points. I'll just run through them really quick. But they talk about we are elected in nonpartisan elections. The beauty of the unicameral, its small size and the structure. The legislative rules. It emphasizes problem solving, not scoring political points. It keeps the people, not the parties, at the center of policy. It makes the senators more equal and independent. It leads to more thoughtful, reasonable policy. It makes the process more accessible to all Nebraskans. And this is the one I want to hit on. It assures that minority interests are not flattened by an overzealous majority. In keeping with the principles of democratic government in the United States, the nonpartisan legislature recognizes that even when a majority supports one point of view, the minority and its views must be part of the problem-solving process. And I just want to quote a couple things from Charlene Barron's PhD. She presented the beauty of our unicameral to the freshman senators when we just came on board. Charlene Barron's PhD, she wrote, "One House, Power to the People," and she also wrote the definitive rule on Senator Warner. And this is what she said: regarding claims that electing committee chairs by written ballot decreases transparency, remember, life is full of trade-offs between two things we value. In this case, the transparency afforded by a roll call vote for legislative leaders must be balanced against the damage such action would cause to nonpartisanship. She goes on to say, in today's increasingly polarized world, we should continue to foster our unique institutional structure, not because George Norris was some sort of all-knowing God, and not because we've always done it this way. No, the unicameral should remain a nonpartisan institution because it works. Here in Nebraska, for Nebraskans. And at this time, I would like to yield the rest of my time to Senator Conrad.
Thank you, Senator Raybold. Senator Conrad, you have 2 minutes, 9 seconds.
Great. Thank you so much, Senator Raybold. Thank you so much, Mr. President. Colleagues, just a few points here, and I'm hopefully going to be able to get through them very quickly. If not, I'm next in the queue and we'll finish up. But number one, I have mentioned our proud tradition of open government in Nebraska that's effectuated through our open records, public records law and open meetings law. If you turn your statute books to 84-1409, you can see the terms for our Opens Meeting Act, and they apply broadly to basically every public body in the state of Nebraska, your NRDs, your school boards, your city councils, your county boards, the list goes on and on and on and on and on. Additionally, if you turn to 84-1413 sub 3, you will read, the vote to elect leadership within a public body may be taken by secret ballot, but the total number of votes for each candidate shall be recorded in the minutes, which mirrors the rules and the prerogative of the Nebraska Legislature in regards to leadership votes.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. So it goes to show you that it's not an end-all and be-all to say transparency. You have to also balance that against nonpartisanship in our instance and relationships writ large. So that's not where the conversation ends. And I share my colleagues' passion for transparency and engagement, but they conveniently leave out the other components that come with secret leadership votes in this body and in all other governing bodies in Nebraska. So the other thing that I want to let folks know is that this has not yet perhaps been injected into the record, and I want to make sure it does not go unnoticed. Even though this is a perennial issue, this issue about how we conduct leadership votes in the Nebraska Legislature has received—
That's your time, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I believe I'm next in the queue.
You are.
Thank you, Mr. President. This issue of how we conduct leadership votes has received renewed attention in recent years by very, very wealthy partisan actors who seek to divide us and seek to peddle their influence in this body. And I will let people know there's been a lot of loose talk about the way we conduct legislative leadership votes is somehow unconstitutional or illegal. If that were true, people would be running to the Attorney General and asking for an opinion. If that were true, people would be running to the courts and asking them for resolution of those serious allegations. But they're not. The people who are pushing for this renewed attempt to divide us and undermine the nonpartisan unicameral legislature and their supporters in this body have not run to the courts, have not run to the Attorney General, but have formed up a PAC that doles out donations. That's a fact. It's widely publicized about the context for this debate. And it's the very warning that our founders had against faction. It's the very warning that George Norris and the people of Nebraska had against moneyed interest, buying influence and peddling influence to this nonpartisan legislature, which is independent, which is one house, which is small by design, which has more transparency than any institution in our sister states or the federal government, with each bill being afforded a hearing, with no secret conference committee, with all votes being on the record. And if members wish to telegraph how they're casting their votes, they can do it without changing the rules. They can take a ballot selfie. They can give a nominating speech. They can give a point of personal privilege. There's any number of ways to effectuate how they conduct their business. But we cannot divorce this debate from the reality of the context for those that are pushing this measure to undermine the will of the people and who seek to peddle partisan influence with big checkbooks. I know my colleagues in this body are better than that. I know that they care about this institution that they serve in. I know that they can see Nebraskans who want less partisanship rather than more. I know that they care about their colleagues. I know that they care about their oath. I know that they care about how they conduct business. This should be a straightforward question, and I've appreciated the opportunity to have more debate by filing a motion to reconsider. Actually, the voices that have come forward since that point have been fantastic and diverse, and I've been listening carefully, as have other members. But in a spirit of good faith, which I always try to operate within, I've let my friend Senator Erdman know and the Speaker know, I am going to withdraw my motion to reconsider. And if members want to remain in the queue to continue this thoughtful and important debate, I encourage them to do so on the underlying motion. With that, Mr. President, I'd like to withdraw the motion and thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Conrad. The motion to reconsider is withdrawn. Mr. Clerk, for items.
Mr. President, thank you. I've got a pair of Michaela Kavanaugh amendments to the rule change, both with notes that she wishes to withdraw. In that case, Mr. President, I have nothing further pending on the amendment to the permanent rules.
Returning to the queue, Senator Von Gilleren, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. With the reconsideration motion being pulled, I'll keep my comments brief here. I'm really quite frustrated by continuing to hear the word transparency and how that word can be used over and over and over again to talk about a secret action that takes place in this body. And just to make sure I wasn't losing my mind, I actually Googled what transparency, how it's defined, and it says transparency is the quality of being easily seen through, while transparency in a business or governance context refers to being open and honest. And we've all talked about how we can be honest with how we voted, and that's true, but it's impossible to be open if the system is not open to scrutiny and open to the public and not be a secret ballot. Senator Hughes mentioned in a reading of the quote from Senator Mike Flood, referencing Senator Bostar being the only Democrat on the Revenue Committee at that time. Senator Bostar still serves on the Revenue Committee, and I can tell you that his leadership, his statesmanship, his intelligence are all honored by that committee. He's a valued asset to the committee, and he was critical to getting some really good legislation done last year, and that's regardless of his party affiliation or how he arrived on that committee. And to believe that this change in this voting would totally destroy the bipartisan nature of some of the things we do, I disagree with. Lastly, I want to, well, second to last, I guess, I want to talk about this seemingly worship of George Norris, who for some reason, I don't know, I keep hearing that we shouldn't do anything to tear down what he built, which I think is really fascinating because George Norris completely destroyed the system that preceded him and brought something better. He was nothing if not a rebel or a non-traditionalist, and I believe that if he were here today, he'd encourage us to break every mold and turn from tradition and not get stuck on that tradition. If he was fearful of change, we'd have a room full of elected officials across the hall, and we'd be worrying about what they were doing over there. The last point I want to make is one I touched on earlier, and Senator Urban also mentioned, that's a matter of constitutionality. Article 3, paragraph 11, second sentence includes only 6 words. It says, all votes shall be viva voce. I looked that up too because my Latin's pretty poor. It literally translates to by word of mouth. And of course, we've used technology to have the scoreboard up front, but we still typically vote by word of mouth in one fashion or another. And none of the votes are secret. Please realize that the support of the secret vote as it currently exists is literally a violation of the Nebraska state constitution. And please consider that in your arguments. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Von Gillerin. Senator Dungan, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. And colleagues, I do appreciate the continued conversation about this. I think this is actually a really interesting topic to debate, and I'm part of the freshman class. We haven't had this conversation before, but I know from speaking with colleagues of mine who have been around longer than me that this is a conversation that has come up multiple times. And as we heard Senator Flood's words too, I think that this is a conversation that's been considered time and time again by this body. I also appreciate Senator Conrad's comments and then her withdrawal, I guess, of that motion to reconsider. I think that what that is evident of is the continued desire to have legitimate and grounded debate on this topic. One thing I think that's been a hallmark of this entire rules conversation that we've had since last week is substantive debate with real suggestions and real conversations surrounding the modification of our rules. We're taking the changes in the rules with a certain gravity, which I appreciate. But I think between the Rules Committee and between the Speaker and now Senator Erdman proposing rule changes, I think we've had a really good conversation about this. And I know there was concern coming into this legislative session that there was going to be this rules fight. Right, we kept hearing about this rules fight that was going to happen, and it's going to be this big knockdown, drag out, and people were almost excited about it. It felt like, what's going to be the continuation of last session? And frankly, that's not been my experience. The tenor of this body has been one of cordiality. I think we've been working together, both across the political divide and also with other members in the Capitol, like the clerk's office, to find the best outcome in these rules. I think that people on the mic have done a really good job of keeping this about what we're talking about and keeping tensions down for the most part. So I guess I'd like to laud my fellow senators in this debate, because this has not been some knockdown, drag out rules fight. This has been a conversation, one that I think is important to have. And so I just want to make sure we, center our conversation in that, because this has been a much better debate, I think, than some were anticipating coming into the session. And that takes teamwork. And that's, I think, what we've all been trying to do, is right that ship as we come into this conversation. So thank you, colleagues. I do still stand opposed to this rule change. I understand, again, there's been a conversation about transparency and what that means. And I know there's been some analogies drawn between having a secret ballot and having media in the hearings, but I would echo my prior comments, which is those are two very different things. Transparency often also means ensuring that the system and the procedures with which we are conducting our votes is transparent, as in we know how it works. The way that we conduct our votes in this body to elect a chair or to elect a speaker is incredibly transparent, insofar as we all know how it works. It's a process and procedure that's laid out before us. You can go ask the clerk, you can go ask any of the senators how it works, and we'll lay that out for you. The same way that elections are transparent when you have a process and a procedure and oversight to ensure they're going to operate properly. Transparency does not necessarily mean that you get to see everybody's individual vote. And I don't want to belabor the point that's been made previously. We all understand the importance of the secret ballot with regard to electing the best people possible. But I do want to reiterate that there are these outside factions, not people in this body and not people who operate in this legislature, but there are outside factions that seek to influence what we do. And they seek to do so through money. They seek to do so through political power. And they seek to do so through threats of, if you don't do this, then I'm going to raise money against you in your reelection. And we should stand against that as a body, because the business that we do here is too serious to be influenced by those outside powers who seek to change how we operate. And the fact that we have these secret ballots is to ensure fidelity to the notion that we are nonpartisan. And I think this bears repeating too. Nonpartisan does not mean that we all agree on things politically.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. Nonpartisan means that we simply operate in a way where partisan politics don't dictate what we have to do the way they do in every other legislature. In addition to that, I heard some conversations with regards to the fact that minorities rule this place. I would disagree with that. If you are in fact in the political minority, I would be curious a time the political minorities ever pushed through a bill without the support of the majority. I think that would be numerically impossible. And so I don't see a situation in which the minority rules this place and doesn't let the majority do what they're going to do. And I say that as somebody who sometimes finds himself as a part of the political minority. But all in all, I think that we are ensuring the longevity of our unicameral and ensuring the fact that what we have here as a nonpartisan body stays special, it stays supported, by ensuring that this rule change does not go through. So I'd urge my colleagues to vote against proposed rule change 3. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Dungan. Senator Mosier, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good afternoon, colleagues. Good afternoon, Nebraska. Well, we've been talking about rule changes, and if you're home watching this and you're wondering, what are we really fighting about here? I think I can add some clarity to the discussion. So when votes are secret, sometimes people say one thing and they vote a different way. But is that exclusively one party or the other? No, it's not. Sometimes you'll be a member of the minority, but the majority party needs a vote for whatever, and they'll make a deal with somebody from the minority party. So to say that this is just a way for Republicans to punish other Republicans because they don't vote the way that some Republicans think they should vote, that's absolute claptrap. That's not true. This is a political place. You can say it's nonpartisan if you want, but the best games and the best political action is done in secret. And that's why some members want to keep these votes secret. That way they can trade things. Maybe their colleagues won't figure out who they sold out to get whatever seat on some committee or whatever they were trying to get. And it's not a matter of outside money trying to influence what happens in here. That happens, don't get me wrong, but that doesn't have anything to do with in my opinion, the secret vote. If you want to know who gave money to any of us in this body, you can go to Accountability and Disclosure and look up Mike Moser, John Lowe, whoever. And all the contributors are listed. And so, you look at some of the members and they get money from unions and nonprofits and early childhood promoters and foundations. And then you find others and they get money from the realtors. They get money from the Chamber of Commerce. So you can just about imagine how they lean. And that's why they got contributions from those organizations. I get kind of tired of hearing about this place being a nonpartisan place. This place is a political body, and politics are played here every day. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Mosier. Senator Hughes, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today in regards to proposed rule change 3. Colleagues, I want to share a few of my thoughts with you on this proposed rule change. One of my standard practices in reviewing items before the legislature is that I ask myself a question: what are the unintended consequences? In the broader context of things, what could go off the rails if we all simply recorded our votes for speaker or committee chairs? Seems pretty simple, right? We currently elect our speaker and our committee chairs like the United States Senate elects its leaders by secret ballot. This proposed rule change would have us now elect our speaker and our committee chairs like the United States House of Representatives elects its speaker by roll call vote. Knowing that, what is the unintended consequence? We have to look no further than how the U.S. House of Representatives twice elected a new speaker last year as an example of such an unintended consequence. Former Representative Kevin McCarthy was elected speaker after 15 roll call votes were cast in January of 2023. The current Speaker of the House, Representative Mike Johnson, the fourth pick put forward by the majority party, was elected Speaker after a period of 22 days. More than 3 weeks passed without the U.S. House having a permanent leader elected by his peers. Colleagues, that would be a quarter of the legislative days in our current 60-day session. Will this happen here in Nebraska? We cannot know the future. However, setting up the conditions for it to happen, knowing of that possibility, is not a choice I'm willing to make. Making a procedural vote into a potential partisan battle will likely invite out-of-state money into the equation. After campaigning to get elected to the legislature, senators could find themselves running campaigns to become speaker or to become a committee chair. Influencing Nebraska voters to weigh in on behalf of out-of-state interests for the speaker or for the committee chairs could quickly lead us to the U.S. House Speaker scenario. Will this happen? I cannot say. Can it happen? Yes, if we enable these conditions by passing the rule change. I understand that there are members of the legislature frustrated with past elections of committee chairs. I also understand the argument that transparency can be an important component in building trust. However, our constituents expect us to get things done and to be able to organize ourselves accordingly without making our system more dysfunctional. My constituents have overwhelmingly called and emailed in asking us as the legislature to get to work and quit messing with the rules. They've been most adamant about opposing this rule. Perhaps if we didn't have the fresh memory of the U.S. House Speaker elections, I would have a different viewpoint. You don't hear anything about the United States Senate taking nearly a month to elect its leaders. And I'll repeat the reason why you don't hear about the U.S. Senate having chaos in leadership, as they use a secret ballot to do it. I do not disparage Senator Erdman for proposing this rule change, and I do not question his intention in proposing it. I'm simply pointing out just one of the unintended consequences of this proposed rule change that could have grave outcomes for this body and our state. I thank my colleagues for listening, and I urge my colleagues to consider this concern and join me in respectively opposing this proposed rule change. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Hughes. Senator Brandt, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is the first time I've spoken on this year. To keep my string intact, I am not for any of this. I have never supported changing this. We've had the secret ballot for 87 years. Hundreds of senators have managed to survive this. And either way, whether you have the secret ballot or do not have the secret ballot, there's going to be hard feelings. So let's imagine a scenario where the secret ballot is gone and people are keeping score. And we've all seen it. People can bide their time in this body for weeks or months, and at some point it's going to be a gotcha vote. At least with the secret ballot, I think gives a little more collegiality. And I think that was the intent of the founders in 1937 when we started this. So I guess I'm kind of in the camp, if it's not broke, don't fix it. And this really affects our new senators. You need to beware. This will be used against you if you vote against the party. I will guarantee there will be a card coming out on some candidate that's running against you on your election that says that you did not support their party. So if this were to come into being, why don't we have a television camera on the Committee on Committees. All our other committee hearings are televised. You know, the Committee on Committees is where the sausage is made. It affects all 48 senators, and let's make it public. Let's show how the committees are made up, you know, if everybody's so hell-bent to do this. And that's, you know, kind of where we see this. There's been a lot of comments about Congress. I don't want to be more like Congress. You know, look at how that's working. It does not work well. So to close, I am not going to support changing this rule. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Brandt. See no one else in the queue. Senator Erdman, you're recognized to close.
Call the House.
There's been a request to place the House under call. Do I see 5 hands? Shall the House go under call? All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
26 ayes, 1 nay to place the House under call, Mr. President.
The House is under call. Senators, please record your presence. Those unexcused senators outside the chamber, please return to the chamber and record your presence. All unauthorized personnel, please leave the floor. The House is under call. Senator Erdman, you are recognized to continue your close.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate that. I believe everyone has had an opportunity to speak that wish to about this issue. Very much appreciate the fact that we're going to get to a time for a vote. We have been talking about this for years, and Senator Conrad made a suggestion or a comment that I've taken to heart, and I am sending a request to the Attorney General to have a decision whether this secret vote is constitutional. So we will get an opinion from him. He's not the Supreme Court, but he does carry quite a bit of weight. We'll see what he has to say. So today will be a vote that the people back home will be able to watch and see how their representative voted today. We've never had a vote on this rule before. This is our first time. So vote as you wish to vote, but make sure you understand that those people back home that sent you here that may have a different opinion than the way you vote, it could be difficult for you. That's not a threat. It's just a piece of information that you need to use. So I would encourage you to vote for this rule change. Let's make a difference. Let's allow the open voting so people understand that people are honest and trustworthy. That is basically the whole sum of what we're discussing here. Are we trustworthy or not? And I thought that Senator Von Gillen very well explained it. Senator Moser did a nice job of saying it happens on both sides of the aisle. I know that for a fact. So we can solve that by having that to be an open vote. I encourage you to vote green. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Erdman. All unexcused members are present. The question is the adoption of proposed rule change number 3. There's a request for roll call, regular order. Mr. Clerk.
Senator Aguilar. Voting no. Senator Albright. Voting yes. Senator Arch. Voting yes. Senator Armendariz. Voting yes. Senator Ballard. Voting yes. Senator Blood. Senator Boston. Voting yes. Senator Bostar. Senator Bostelman. Voting yes. Senator Brandt. Voting no. Senator Brewer. Voting yes. Senator John Kavanaugh. Voting no. Senator Michaela Kavanaugh. Voting no. Senator Clements. Voting yes. Senator Conrad. Voting no. Senator Day. Voting no. Senator DeBoer. Voting no. Senator DeKay. Voting yes. Senator Dorn. Voting no. Senator Dover. Voting yes. Senator Dungan. Voting no. Senator Erdman. Voting yes. Senator Frederickson. Voting no. Senator Holleran. Voting yes. Senator Hansen. Voting yes. Senator Hardin. Voting yes. Senator Holcroft. Voting yes, Senator Hughes. Voting no, Senator Hunt. Voting no, Senator Ibaugh. Senator Jacobson. Voting yes, Senator Kauth. Voting yes, Senator Linehan. Voting yes, Senator Lippincott. Voting yes, Senator Lowe. Voting yes, Senator McDonald. Senator McKinney. Senator Meyer. Voting yes, Senator Mosier. Voting yes, Senator Merman. Voting yes, Senator Raybold. Voting no, Senator Riepe. Voting no, Senator Sanders. Senator Slama. Voting yes, Senator Vargas. Voting no, Senator Von Gillern. Voting yes, Senator Walls. Senator Wayne. Voting yes, Senator Wishart. Voting no. Vote is 26 ayes, 16 nays, Mr. President, on adoption of the amendment to the rules.
The amendment is adopted. Is not adopted. I raise the call. Next item, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, next proposed rule change, amendment to the permanent rules. Proposed rule change 29 from Senator Ben Hansen, amending Rule 5, Section 4.
Senator Hansen, you're recognized to open.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon, colleagues. As many of you know about this rule change already, it's pretty simple for the most part. There's not a lot of language involved with it, but the rule change I've proposed is the same concept that I brought 3 years ago and again this year. And I think it's even more pertinent this year based on, if anybody looks at the numbers, the amount of bills that we introduced this year. This rule change would limit the amount of bills a senator can introduce to 14 bills. And for everyone's information, I'm going to be passing around an amendment that I introduced to alter this rule change just a little bit from 14 to 16 bills, and also increase the amount of committee bills from 8 to 10. I did have a part in the bill that would say if you kept it below 5 bills, you would have the opportunity for 2 priority bills, but I did scratch that with my new amendment. So really, this rule change is limiting the amount of bills a senator can introduce per year down to 16, and then increase the amount of committee bills to 10. If we pass this, we would not be the only state with a limit on bill introduction. Around a quarter of the country's legislatures have a set of maximum number of bills elected officials can introduce. From the latest info provided, Arizona allows 7, Colorado 5, Florida 6, Indiana 10, Louisiana 5, Montana 7, North Carolina 15, North Dakota 15, Oklahoma 8, Tennessee 15, Virginia 15, and Wyoming is at 5. And some of you may or may not know, years ago, 70s and the 80s, the senators were actually limited to 10 bills as a maximum. So this is not something that's unheard of. This is not unprecedented. Something that I've learned as a state senator is that it takes time and effort to craft, contemplate, discuss, and finalize a bill. Unfortunately, we have a high number of bills that are indefinitely postponed each year because many essential bills don't get a chance to make it on the floor. So the question I ask my colleagues is, are we sacrificing quality for quantity? The intent of this rule change is to motivate more specificity and thoughtfulness by both the lobby and senators. It would narrow our conversations to focus less on statement bills and more on substantial bills. I know one thing many of us have been hearing, and we have been noticing, especially over the years, this is my 6th year here now, is that we spend more and more time in hearings than we do on the floor debating bills. Another thing that we typically hear is that many bills that we even prioritize do not even get on the floor because of a lack of time. So if we were able to at least put some kind of guardrails in the amount of bills a senator can introduce, in my mind, that would allow more time for us to debate, deliberate substantial bills on the floor that people are passionate about and they care about, instead of being stuck, in the ether of hearing schedules. And so just for everyone's information as well, we thought last biennium we introduced a lot of bills. Last biennium we introduced 1,277 bills. I thought that was a lot. This year we broke a record. If you have been paying attention to the amount of bill numbers that were on, I believe it was around 1,411. So that's almost 150 bills more than the last biennium. And I did a little math. If you average it out per senator, that comes out to about 14 per year. So I'm kind of curious to hear debate and people's opinions on this rule change. And then kind of see where this goes. So with that, I'll yield the rest of my time. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Hansen. Senator Dungan, you're next in the queue.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I do respectfully oppose Rule Change 29, and I think we're going to hear from a few people about some potential problems, but I wanted to kind of set the stage for what I think some of the issues are with this. I absolutely appreciate Senator Hansen's suggestions when it comes to trying to find ways to make this body operate more effectively and more efficiently, and I understand the notion that there are many other legislatures that limit the amount of bills that individual senators can bring. I was talking with some other state legislators and folks who work in state government in Colorado, for example, and found out they do limit the amount of bills that senators can bring, but they have an entirely different system than we do when it comes to committees being able to introduce bills, and an entirely different system with regard to how many bills have hearings and where things go. So, saying that other states have limits on bills, I think is somewhat problematic to draw the through line with us as Nebraska, given the structure of our unicameral being so different. Senator Hansen is correct. We did previously, as a body, limit the amount of rules that could be offered by an individual senator. Back in 1979, I believe, they limited the amount of rules that an individual senator could offer in a long session to 10, and I believe it was 7 in a short session. Sounded like a great idea. Everyone thought, oh, this is going to be great, we're going to get more things taken care of. But what ultimately ended up happening was very akin to what we saw last session, where rather than have individual bills be offered and individual bills be debated and votes be taken on separate parts of bills, they ended up with these massive Christmas tree bills where a whole litany of issues were packed into these giant bills that came out onto the floor, and they were just so full of issues that people weren't even entirely sure what they were voting on. And beyond that, it became incredibly complicated for the public to know what was being debated and what was being voted on. A good example of this is last session. Colleagues, look at the bills that we voted through last year. LB 50 is a good example. I have that was the bill that came out of Judiciary last year. I have people ask me all the time about individual components of LB 50 and, oh, how does this change this, or how does this affect me? And I have to go back and look at it because it's difficult to remember what we even voted on. Transportation and telecommunications, revenue. We had multiple packages come out of revenue that were just a whole multitude of bills that might have warranted some more individual debate. And what I think is interesting is that you're correct, Senator Hansen, there is precedent for us doing this, but in 1981, the legislature overwhelmingly repealed that rule change with the limitation of bills because they saw that it did not work. So there is precedent for this rule being offered. There is then also precedent and historical information. We can go back and look and see that it failed to accomplish the goal of making things easier to follow and things easier for the public to understand. And there's historical precedent for the fact that it was then ultimately repealed. And so, given the fact that history is often the best predictor of the future, I think we should heed some of the information that we can get out of that 1979 rule change and subsequent 1981 repeal. This is not going to effectuate the thing that we think it is going to. I do appreciate the removal in the upcoming amendment of the incentivization to keep the bills lower. I think that if the name of the game for a lot of these rule changes we've had throughout the last week and a half is avoid gamification as much as possible, I think it becomes incredibly complicated and potentially gamified if we encourage individuals to not bring bills simply to give them a second priority. So I appreciate Senator Hansen listening to some of the potential critiques or criticisms of that and then removing that in the amendment. Still, I think the limitation of bills to 16 is too few, and it simply is going to increase the amount of packages that we're going to see put out by committees on the floor of the legislature. In addition to that, and I anticipate some of my colleagues are likely to, thank you, Mr. President, talk about this as well. Many of us get constituent bills sent to us. And these are constituent bills that have to do with maybe a very small niche issue and something that is not likely going to maybe get a priority from a senator because they've already been working on something. But it's important for us to introduce constituent bills to ensure that the voices of the people we represent are heard. The limitation of how many bills we can bring has the, I think, potentially outsized consequence of limiting the amount of bills brought to us by constituents who don't have lobbyists, who don't have special interests to advocate on their behalf that senators otherwise would bring. And I would hate to see the voice of the people limited by a simple rule change that would encourage us to not listen to our constituents for smaller issues that are of equal importance and rather focus only on the issues that we think are important. So for those reasons, colleagues, I do oppose Rule Change 29. I appreciate the conversation we're going to have here today. And I'd encourage some more people to jump in and talk a little bit about why they think this might be positive or negative. Thank you, Mr. President.
That's your time. Thank you, Senator Dungan. Senator Erdman, you're recognized to speak. Senator Frederickson, you're recognized to speak. Excuse me, Senator Erdman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Sorry for the delay. So Senator Hansen and I had spoke about this rule several times in the last couple of years. And I made this comment earlier, and I'll make it again. At some point in time, we're going to have to decide how many rules, how many bills we can introduce because of the amount of time we have for hearings. So we have exceeded, I don't know, we're around 1,300, 1,320, and that doesn't include the LRs this year. So that means we've got about nearly 550 or 500 plus bills to have hearings on in a 60-day session. So we either have to start limiting the number of bills that can be introduced, or we need to make a decision which bills have a hearing and which ones do not. And I don't think that latter is probably going to be acceptable to anybody in this room, that if your bill didn't get a hearing. So we need to decide how to manage that number. And I think Senator Hansen is onto something. I think one thing that would help it a lot would be if you adopt LR 281CA, the amendment I dropped into the Constitution that we meet every other year for 90 days. That would help limit the number of bills that could possibly be introduced as well. So Senator Hansen has worked to try to come to some conclusion with everyone what would be acceptable. I appreciate Senator Hansen's ability to try to negotiate that, and he has made adjustments to what he originally started with. And I think as we go through this discussion this afternoon and perhaps tomorrow morning, that we can come to a conclusion what does make sense. What doesn't make sense is that someone would introduce 50 or 60 bills. That doesn't make sense to me. So each one of us is assigned to a committee, and if you have 50 bills and you have to go in front of another committee to introduce your bill, chances are you're seldom, or if ever, in the committee that you've been assigned to. And that's a problem. So I think that Senator Hansen's on the right track. I support his amendment, and I also support the underlying rule. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Erdman. Mr. Clerk, for an amendment.
Mr. President, I've got an amendment here from Senator DeBoer with a note she wishes to withdraw. And in that case, Mr. President, an amendment from Senator Hansen to proposed rule change 29, striking as to bill limitation and inserting to no more than 16 bills introduced at any one session, striking 8 and inserting 10 after each committee shall be limited to.
Senator Hansen, you're recognized to open on your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. This will be handed out to everybody and get on their desk here pretty soon, but it's pretty much what I described earlier when I opened up. Originally had 14 bills limitation. This is going to actually increase to 16. And then also that was recommended to me that committee bills going from 8, we will increase that to 10. A lot of people I know on the floor didn't even realize committees have 8 bills that they can introduce. And there was some concern among the fact that if we do limit the amount of bills, these small non-contentious bills that are just language changes, they strike a word that maybe a department brings to us. In my opinion, that's what a lot of these committee bills can be used for. So they won't take up part of our 16. I know in HHS, we have maybe 2 or 3 of them that we've introduced so far, just very simple language changes that we can even package together in a committee priority if we need to. But ideally, I don't feel like those are very substantive bills that a senator can introduce on their own. I think a senator who introduces a bill by themselves that they're, like I mentioned before, passionate about, that it is more substantial than just a language change, takes time, it takes effort. You're talking to your constituents, you get your staff working on it, you're talking to your colleagues. That takes a lot of time. And so that's why, that was one of the reasons behind the increase in on the committee bills. So those can actually be used for some more of those language change small bills. And like I mentioned before, I did cross off the part of having, if you kept it below the incentive part, that if you kept it below 5 bills introduced, you'd get 2 priorities. I think a few people on the floor and having some heartburn about that part. So that's why I took that part out. In essence, that's just the majority of the amendment, and I would appreciate your green vote on that amendment to increase the total amount of bills. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Hansen. Senator Frederickson, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today, I'm just hearing about this amendment from Senator Hansen, and I think I might actually support that amendment. I don't know if I'm going to, however, support the underlying proposal to the rule change. I appreciate Senator Hansen and his thoughtful approach here, and as evidenced by this amendment, I think his willingness to actually adapt this rule change to better meet the needs of the body and of our colleagues. I do think that, what the parts of me that I kind of still have some questions about and I'm pondering and gives me hesitance about voting for this rule change is I do think one of the things that is special about our role in here is that we have a lot of autonomy as senators. I think that we can sort of determine based on our own districts and our constituency what those needs are. We might have years in here where based on our constituents and constituencies, we feel that we only need 1 or 2 bills to bring. We might have years where we feel like we need to bring 15 or 20 bills. So I think that that's, I think kind of setting a limit on what we can bring, while I can appreciate the merits of it in terms of with the hope of kind of creating maybe more thoughtful bills. I think that sometimes it's not a one size fits all approach with that. So that's one thing I'm kind of thinking about. I also think that bill introduction kind of self-regulates in and of itself. Our bill drafters might feel otherwise considering how many bills were introduced this biennium. But I think any of us in here we've all introduced bills at some point. I think we could all agree that once you hit a certain number of bills that you introduce, if you're introducing like 50 bills, for example, I think it's literally impossible to work 50 bills effectively in this legislature. So, when I'll kind of talk about my own decision-making process when I'm introducing bills, I think about, okay, what's realistic of the bills I can actually pass? What's important to my constituents, but also what's realistic of what I can actually speak with colleagues about, meet with colleagues about, put thought into the actual committee, the bill hearings, put thought into arguments for the floor. And that becomes kind of the self-regulating thing. If I brought 100 bills, well, that just wouldn't be possible to do. And I think that that's would be a disservice not only to my constituents, but also to Nebraskans and our colleagues in here. So I do think there is some self-regulation that organically occurs. I also, the other concern I have with this is that I worry that if we do limit the amount of bills senators can bring, I do worry that that might incentivize more omnibus style bills. I think that senators might try to get more and more creative and try to expand from a single subject to more ideas in a single bill to sort of fit into that. I mean, I think obviously our state constitution prohibits bills that are more than a single subject, but I think is evidenced by some of what we passed last year, including 574 and 626. Is it single subject? That's something that there's differing opinions on. So I do worry that limiting bills is going to incentivize more of that. And I think that's a disservice to the people of Nebraska in the sense that the benefit of single subject bills allows for legitimate debate on the floor related to the single subject of the bill, as opposed to a bill with 20, 30, 40 different ideas wrapped into it. It's impossible to effectively debate all of those ideas at once. So that's the one thing that gives me hesitance about this. Again, I think I will support this amendment that Senator Hansen brought, and I always appreciate Senator Hansen's thoughtfulness and in his presentation of his ideas and thoughts. I do not think I will support the underlying rule change. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Frederickson. Senator Arch, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have not yet decided on this bill, but I want to talk a little bit about some of what Senator Erdman talked about previously, and that is kind of the trajectory we're on right now with regards to number of bills. So I asked the assistant clerk to help me with some of these numbers, and the numbers that I was given, the biennium 1920, we had 1,221 legislative bills introduced. 21-22, we had 1,277. 23-24, we have 1,403. And you know, where does that trajectory end? Is a concern of mine. I agree with Senator Erdman. I am concerned that we're approaching a point where we're going to have to make some very difficult decisions. If we don't self-regulate or in some way impose a regulation. But in both of our sessions, of course, we have a limited number of days, 90 days in the long session, 60 days in the short session. I went back and took a look at how many weeks do we have for committee hearings in each of those sessions. In the long session, we have 10 weeks. In the short session, we have 6 or 7 weeks. So we have fewer weeks. Number of bills, just using this biennium, 800, roughly 800 in the long session, 10 weeks, so about 80 a week we will have hearings on. And in the short session, looks like we're going to have about 60 a week because we have about 600 bills in 6 weeks. So we may have to decide, and this is kind of where we're headed as far as I can see, where not every bill would get a hearing, or limit number of bills. I don't think the option is there to extend the session, and if we extend committee hearings, then of course we eat into our time on the floor, where we wouldn't have enough time to consider the 108 priority bills that are available to us at this time. So at the legislative council, I brought up an idea of some restructuring of our committees in an attempt to handle some of this volume issue, and I say the disparity of referencing to various committees, and so as I pointed out at the council, we have one committee that receives about 49 bills per hearing days per week. 49 bills per hearing day per week. And we have another one, and these are the two extremes. We have another one that receives 9 bills per hearing days per week. So 49 bills versus 9 bills per hearing day per week. So you can see that we have issues there as well. But in general, it's that overall volume that concerns me. The other thing that concerns me is really, as I've observed senators here, senators come with very different strategies of what bills they will introduce themselves. And we have some senators who will come and say, look, I'm going to represent my constituents. If a constituent brings me a bill, I will introduce it. Others come and they say, I am a single issue senator. I am coming from my district because this particular issue is a very large. And that senator may introduce 3 bills during that period of time. And then you have those probably in the middle who would say, I will introduce bills if I believe in them, and if I don't support it, I will not introduce that bill, whether it's a constituent or anyone else. And so, you know, the limitations concern me in this respect, that it is that to the one that says I will introduce a bill if a constituent asks me to introduce a bill. Those obviously will be limited, and so I say that only I know that we have a problem. I think Senator Hansen has accurately identified that we are heading to a point where a very difficult decision may be required of us, and as I say, I'm still in process right now, and I'll take a look at Senator Hansen's amendment as well. I haven't seen that yet, but as I say, Senator Hansen has identified the problem. That much I certainly agree with, and I'm still considering the bill, or the rule, excuse me. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Speaker Art. Senator DeBoer, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I do just kind of want to point out something here, which is that what we're talking about is limited legislative time, and then we're talking about number of bills, but those two things don't equate. I can tell you that the 12, or I don't know what the number was, but about probably 12 bills I had in judiciary last year took less time in hearing than I can think of 4 or 5 single bills took. So the number of bills that you introduce doesn't necessarily equal to how long they're going to take to hear in a public hearing. The controversial nature of the bills is much more in line with how much legislative time they take. So maybe we should talk about not bringing as controversial a bills, but nobody wants to tell a senator, you're not allowed to bring a controversial bill because it takes too much legislative time. So that's just sort of one of the concerns I have about limiting bill numbers. Another is I know historically we've never in this body had both the number of committee bills and number of individual bills limited at the same time. So in the past, they have had times when they've limited the number of individual bills you could have, but the number of committee bills was unlimited at that time. And vice versa, the number of committee bills is currently limited, but not the number of individual bills. So this would be the first time in our history when we'd have both, as far as I can look back in the records, when we would both have the number of committee bills and the number of individual bills limited. Okay. The point about how much legislative time we're taking up, of course, is interesting, but it does mean that there's more people involved in our hearings, which I think is a good thing. So we might need to figure out how to navigate our bills better. I know that there are times when we have 6 or 7 or 8 bills in one of my committees, and we're done by 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And there are other times when we have 2 scheduled, and we're there till 9 o'clock at night. So again, I don't think that the number of bills you introduce has anything to do with how much time it takes to process them. Senator Frederickson said he doesn't think anybody can process or support 50 bills. That's probably true, but if you had 50 consent calendar bills, you probably could handle 50 consent calendar bills. So I think perhaps this is an issue of personal responsibility, where each senator needs to take personal responsibility for how difficult and how contentious their bills are going to be, so that they bring the sort of right amount of bills for the amount of contentiousness they're going to bring into this body, so that they can handle all of that and so that we can legislatively handle it. This is the kind of thing where we're putting a number on things that really, really should be personal responsibility. And each one of us in here should take personal responsibility for our bills and how much time we spend on our bills and how much time this body spends on our bills based on how controversial they are, how many we're bringing, how complicated they are, how big they are. I mean, there are things that we need to fix. One of the problems people are concerned about with this particular rule change that I've heard articulated is that we will then just start seeing introduced composite bills, which have many different pieces to them, all in one bill. We did that last session, and it didn't really seem very popular. A lot of folks were saying, we don't like it when you have one bill with so many things in it. I've seen this before where we bring a bill to hearing that has many pieces to it, and you can't even have a conversation about all the different pieces in the hearing. Somebody gets up and they have 5 minutes. There's 37 pieces to a bill. They can't talk about it all. So I think that means this limitation is going to put us in that situation again where people aren't getting to actually speak to it. It's going to perhaps give us a kind of sense that we have limited the amount of legislation and the complexity of the legislation we're talking about. But I don't see how there's any actual relationship between the complexity of legislation and the number of bills introduced. So That's my concern with this rule, but I actually am still listening. And unlike Senator Erdman's perspective that I may never change my mind, even though I
That's
didn't
your
vote
time,
for it in
Senator.
committee, maybe. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Jacobson, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I've been pretty quiet today, listening and taking it all in, and I did want to weigh in on this bill. I always kind of like to look at the numbers, and I think that, first of all, I appreciate Senator Hansen bringing this bill and giving us something to consider. But let me give you some numbers that I think stand out at me. So we introduced in this session 561 bills for the 60-day session. That would be on top of the 820 that were introduced last session. And I think we disposed of about 250 of them last year. So a lot of bills out there that are going to go into the scrap heap at the end of this session, because we'll start fresh in 2025. And maybe we can hit 1,000 next year. I don't know. But let's look at the numbers once. So this year we had 10 senators who introduced less than 5 bills. We had 20 senators who introduced between 6 and 13 bills. So there's 30 senators who have introduced 13 or fewer bills. 2 introduced 14, 4 introduced 15, and then 12 senators introduced 16 or more bills. 12 senators. 4 of them went up to 19. They were between 16 and 19 bills. 4 went from 20 to 29 bills. And yes, we had 4 senators who introduced more than 30 bills this session. So I don't disagree with Senator DePore on the fact that, yeah, there's some less controversial bills. There are some simpler bills. There are consent file bills. But let's face it, based upon our track record from last year, we had a lot of bills that we didn't have a consent file to speak of. And so we didn't get much done. But I want you to think about another thing too, when you've got 30 plus bills. Is that means that you're busy going to other committees to present those bills, and that means you're not sitting in the committee that you serve on to listen to the public, who I think we talk a lot about that second house being important. Well, if we respect their views as a committee member, I feel a responsibility to be in that committee to hear the second house talk to us about their views on the bill along with the introducer. But if that introducer is running around to all the other committee hearings to be able to get their bill introduced to the committee and deal with questions, then that means they're not sitting on the committee that they're assigned to. And I think that's another problem that goes with this. So I'm a little bit like the speaker. I don't have strong feelings one way or the other on this, but I think looking at the numbers, I'm not sure we're at great risk, particularly if we're going to increase the number of committee bills. And let's also remember that somebody wants to introduce a really complex bill, it's going to get assigned to a committee, and the committee's going to take that bill apart, and it's going to look a lot different probably by the time it gets to the floor. So I think it's different than what we did last year with the huge Christmas trees. I mean, I'm talking about a Chevy Chase Christmas tree that we had last year. I mean, and those babies were big. But I think we can control that by reducing the number of bills that we have to deal with. And I think there's a greater opportunity that we can hear more bills on the floor, because just like we found again this year, if you don't have a priority bill or a committee priority, there's strong likelihood the bill won't be heard unless we can get it on consent file or unless we can really keep things moving. I'm hopeful that we can, but that's my 2 cents worth. And I always like to look at the numbers, and these are the numbers. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Jacobson. Senator John Kavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate everyone's conversation on this. Like most, I guess I'm digesting the most recent amendment, but I'm opposed to the underlying idea of putting a limit on the number of bills folks can introduce. We talk about a lot of stuff around here that, whether it's solution in search of a problem and that sort of thing. And I know everybody's talking about a large number of bills and there are resource constraint questions, but we're all individually elected by our 40,000 constituents to come and serve them in the way that we see best. And that means voting how you want to vote, or how you think is the right way to vote for your district and for what you think is the right thing. And it means introducing bills that you think your constituents will want to see introduced, and serving them in that way of trying to pass bills, bringing bills that are bringing forward ideas for your constituents. And if we say there's only so many ideas, if you went with the current or the proposal that we're on right now, saying there's only 16 good ideas out of your district in one session, that I think that's doing a disservice to the spirit of trying to find the iterative process, the deliberative process we engage in here. Because a bill raises a question. It starts a conversation. Ultimately, it gets to the idea of passing a law, but those conversations often start with earlier bills that have come through process. I passed a bill last year. Actually, it was Senator Dungan talked about LB 50. It was in LB 50, but it was a bill I had brought 3 times. I've been here this is my 4th year, and I brought it every year, and finally it was incorporated in LB 50, and I kept bringing it. It was a small little thing. It was putting in statute the procedure for tolling appeals in criminal cases when someone's appealing to the U.S. Supreme Court. And so it was very small, but I kept bringing it because I didn't have to limit myself by the number of bills, and then did get it passed, and it will make a difference to some people. I don't know what's going on. Is everybody's emergency phone going off? Snow squall warning. That's for the record, folks. 428 January 18th. That beeping sound, snow squall warning. I've never heard of a snow squall. But kind of made me lose my train of thought there. But actually, now that Senator Hunt is sitting here in front of me, and I was thinking about something that she said at some point in the past, which is, the system is not broken, it just works for who it works for, or something along those lines. She can correct me in terms of the actual jargon. And I thought about that for this particular amendment. Some folks on one side of this philosophical divide want to limit the number of bills. And you could say those folks see the world and say it's working just fine. And then there are some folks who bring a lot of bills because they see a lot more problems and are striving to fix them. And so this amendment, and the reason I'm opposed to it, the idea of limiting bills, is that we should not say that there are problems out there we can identify, but I have to choose which one I'm trying to fix because I can only bring so many bills. And if you as a legislator, as you as a representative of your constituents, if you see a problem, you should try to fix it. You should work with the folks who it's affecting. You should work with the advocacy community. You should work with other people in this body and try and find a solution and bring a bill for that. And you shouldn't be artificially constrained in which problems you're trying to fix based off of our determination that people should only be able to bring a certain number of bills. So there are a lot of other reasons that Senator Dungan and Senator DeBoer have identified about what will happen in terms of complexity of bills and things like that. But fundamentally, we're here to use our best judgment to try to bring laws that will improve the state of Nebraska. And the state of Nebraska has problems that cannot be solved based off of some artificial number of determination. So I'm opposed to this rule, and I'm opposed to the idea of limiting the number of bills. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Hunt, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, colleagues. Yeah, Senator Kavanaugh, I think I've said something like, it's not that the system is broken because it's working for somebody, or I don't know. I always say really smart things like that, but I don't know what I said. I do rise also in opposition to this proposed rule change. I think in this body, sometimes there's a pattern I see where there's a tendency sometimes to just sort of try things in an effort to be more efficient or more transparent or save time or save resources. But in the end, it creates bureaucracy. In the end, it's just sort of fussing with a system that is in fact working. And I take Speaker Arch's point about maybe we are getting to a place where we have consistently, exponentially more and more and more bills introduced every year. We're reaching perhaps limitations on how many hearings our committees can realistically have. But I disagree that this rule is A, urgent and necessary this year in the middle of the biennium, or B, actually going to solve that problem. I'm looking at this amendment to the rule change that was passed out that says we'll limit bill introduction to no more than 16 bills at any one session, and then limiting committees to 10 bills each session. What this would just incentivize me to do, as others have said, is if I had more than 16 ideas I needed to share, I am one of those people who will introduce constituent bills so that my constituents have the opportunity to come to the Capitol and testify about something that specifically matters to them. And I think that's a really unique feature of our system here in Nebraska that is special, that I would hate to see taken away. But if this rule was in place, I would take my 16 bills, and each one of those may, by necessity, have to become an omnibus bill. You put, 8 different bills in a bill, and that's not less of a burden on drafters or revisers. That's not less of a burden on committees. I actually think it muddies the process. It makes the hearing more confusing. It probably is confusing for constituents and potential testifiers who may be coming in to talk about one part of the bill, but not another part of the bill. I can, already in a lot of our committee hearings, I see senators and colleagues tuning out, not listening or paying attention, because these long hearing days do get difficult, and it is hard for a lot of us who have these ADD tendencies to focus on things like that. But I see this rule change making that even more difficult. It also reminds me of the same tendency we have in this body. And I think it's a trend that we see across the whole country, which is something I don't like or don't understand or don't prefer or love should be illegal. Like, let's pass a whole law to stop people from doing something that I don't particularly love or understand or want to see in the world. And we're doing, that's extreme, but we're doing the same thing with this rules change. It's a member saying, okay, it might be, when Senator Hansen was the chair of Business and Labor, he didn't even name a committee priority. In our executive session, we had to have a talk about that, about, do we want our committee to even have a priority, because he didn't want to have one at all. And I think, Senator Hansen can certainly speak for himself, but I think that he has a very consistent philosophical view that less government is good, and what less government means is fewer bills. So the fewer bills, a committee can put out into the ether for debate on the floor, the better. Maybe that's his philosophical view, and I think that would be consistent, and that would make sense. I understand that from kind of a libertarian perspective that I have, but I don't think that our personal preference means that a rule change is in order, and I don't think that this rule change actually actually solves what it seeks to solve. I also think that this would give a lot of undue power to the lobby, because they would say, every senator only has 16 bills, and so all of our special interests that we have to make sure that those are plugged into somebody, and it'll become more and more urgent for them to make sure they have a sponsor for their issues, leaving less time and space for our constituents to have their real concerns heard. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Hunt. Senator Dungan, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, a snow squall is a short-fused and focused in a distinct area snowstorm similar to a tornado or a severe thunderstorm. So until 5 p.m., we are in a snow squall warning, meaning there might or might not be a snow tornado outside, which sounds like a Jason Statham movie. I wanted to make sure we all knew that so the record was clear. I didn't want people looking back on this in 15 to 20 years also wondering what a snow squall was. But beyond that, colleagues, I do, again, rise opposed to this rule change. I have had a chance to review the amendment now, and I do thank Senator Hansen as well for, I think, taking into consideration some of the concerns that people have had with regards to his original proposed rule. I still personally am not there in agreement with this, because I believe, even like I said earlier, now having reviewed it, raising this to 16 and then increasing the committee's allowed bills to 10, I still think that we're going to run into the same problems that we've had before. As I stated earlier, the historical precedent here shows us that when we've done this in the past, it's really negatively impacted the substance of the body and the ability for us to bring bills that truly matter to the people. And I think it's made it more opaque as opposed to easier for the public to understand what we're doing. In addition to that, Senator John Kavanaugh also brought up the topic of people who bring bills, or senators who bring bills, time and time again in order to start a conversation. There are a number of bills that have been passed recently that had been brought time and time again in this legislative body, and it was only through the process of them coming up multiple times in a row that I think they were able to ultimately have this conversation enough times to get to that ultimate place of passage. And you'll hear people say when they introduce a bill, sometimes, colleagues, I understand this is the first time it's come up. This is the beginning of a conversation. This is being brought to get the ball rolling on this topic. And I think there is some merit to that. We deal with incredibly difficult and heady issues in the legislature that oftentimes are difficult to understand at first blush. All of us bring our own expertise here to the table, but certainly we don't bring expertise in every area. I often say that if a senator tells you they're an expert in multiple areas, they probably aren't telling you the truth. And I think it's easier for senators to be genuine about that and say, hey, I come to the table with what my background is, what my history is, but I don't understand this other subject that's completely different from my background. And so it takes us time to learn about these things, and it takes us time to fully understand, I think, and appreciate the gravity and the complexity of a number of the issues with which we deal. I sit on the Banking and Insurance Committee. It's a number of subjects in there that are really complicated. And there's a number of subjects in there that are really, really important. And we've passed a number of bills in the last year or two that I think are really, really beneficial and helpful for the citizens of Nebraska. But I think it's because you're able to bring a number of bills and have these conversations over and over again that you're able to get to that place. Sometimes a bill is not ready the first time it's brought, but that doesn't mean we can't have that conversation. Our legislature assuring that every single bill gets a hearing means that each of these topics have the ear of a senator. And just because something isn't important to you doesn't mean it isn't important to the people that it's trying to affect or the people that it's trying to help. I know that there's a number of bills that have been brought to my attention that when I first looked at, I didn't understand the people that was trying to help. And then by virtue of the fact that we had a hearing, I understood the importance of it. Similarly, I've brought bills that I think have a real, true, substantive benefit to Nebraskans, where when I talk to my colleagues about it, at first blush, they don't understand how it's going to help people. And by the fact that we get a hearing, that's what allows those senators.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. That's what allows those senators to understand that, to hear from the people it affects, to hear from other individuals who can advocate for the benefit of these bills. So the fact that each senator can bring any number of bills, if they're willing to work hard enough, if they're willing to put the effort in to draft those bills, conduct the hearings, get the witnesses or the testifiers ready for the hearing, if they're willing to put that energy in because it's important to them and because it's important to the people that we are here to represent, I don't think that should be limited. Because there's always going to be some niche group of individuals out there. There's always going to be some subset of Nebraskans that you haven't thought of before who need help. And they're talking to a senator asking for help, and they're asking for a small modification. But if we're limited to the amount of bills that we can bring, it is going to harm those people who otherwise don't always have a voice for themselves, who need help. And they're talking to a senator asking for help, and they're asking for a small modification. But if we're limited to the amount of bills that we can bring, it is going to harm those people who otherwise don't always have a voice for themselves. So again, I very much appreciate.
Ostar, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President.
So I voted against this rule in the Rules Committee, and for a number of reasons, one of which I'll talk about now. But I do appreciate Senator Hansen having the conversation on this, working with folks. I know he's talking to folks on the floor. He's bringing amendments. That's certainly valuable and appreciated, and I want to point that out. One of the reasons that I did not support this rule is that I don't think this is the first step we should take to address the problem that we have before us. It is true that we spend a lot of time hearing bills in committee, and if we did less of that, then maybe we would have more time on the floor to consider bills as a full legislature. But the reality is we have a couple of committees that hear a lot of bills, and we have some committees that don't hear that many. So one thing we could do to try to solve some of this problem is to do some reorganization of our committees. And that's actually something that there are several of us talking about and working on. It's a complicated problem to address, but it's a valuable one to work on and try to find a solution for. And so to me, I recognize there's a problem, but this feels like we're jumping to an extreme solution before we've had an opportunity to consider and pursue other options that would be less limiting of our ability to most comprehensively represent our constituents. And that's why I oppose it. That's a reason I oppose it. I think we should try a few other things first. We should work on evaluating what we can do for the Judiciary Committee. Folks talk about making it a 5-day committee. That could help. Folks talk about splitting up the subject matter jurisdictions into parts. Maybe that would work. I don't know. But right now, it isn't that every committee has an overburdensome workload. A couple committees do. Most committees do not. So if we can find a way to rebalance our work, I think that alone will off of our committee workload and give us more time on the floor to actually consider and pass more bills. We have committees right now that take weeks off of the schedule. They don't have enough bills to even fill their days, even to a minor extent. They'll take whole weeks off. And good for them. They don't have that many bills. What are they going to do? They shouldn't make it up. But that tells me that there are things that we can do. There are solutions to this challenge and this problem that we can pursue before we take what I think is,
1 minute.
at the very least, thank you, Mr. President, a more extreme response than what that would be. I don't want to characterize this as extreme in and of itself on its face, but it's more extreme than just trying to do some reorganization. Let's start there, colleagues. Let's try to see if we can find a solution that does not place limits on what I would consider fundamental elements of our democratic process in this body. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Bostar. Mr. Clerk, for items.
Thank you, Mr. President. Reference report from the Referencing Committee concerning Legislative Bill 1302 through LB 1411, as well as LR 282, 283CA, 284CA, 285CA, 286CA, and 287CA. as well as re-references for LB 1190, 1191, and 999. Notice a committee hearing from the Agriculture Committee as well as the Judiciary Committee. Amendment to be printed, Senator Conrad to LB 16. A motion to suspend the rules to allow for the cancellation of a public hearing from Senator Holleran, as well as a motion to withdraw LB 1140 from Senator Erdman. Those will both be printed in the journal. An communication from the governor. Dear Mr. President, Speaker Arch, members of the legislature, contingent upon your approval for the following individuals being appointed member of the Tax Equalization and Review Commission. Jacqueline Russell. Signed, Jim Pillen, Governor. The referencing committee notice will meet in room 2102 at 8:50 tomorrow morning, 8:50 tomorrow morning, referencing. Name ads, Senator Lippincott to LB 15, Senator Hansen LB 830, Senator Clements 876, Senator Lippincott 999, Senator Dorn and Senator Jacobson to 1035, McDonald 1124, Jacobson 1269, Boston 1320, Senator Ibach name withdrawn from LB 1330. Finally, Mr. President, priority motion. Senator Clements will move to adjourn the body until Friday, January 19th at 9:00 a.m.
The question is, shall the legislature adjourn for the day? All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, nay. We are adjourned.